All right, we got a call we're going to be able to make in another one of those battleground House seats. This one in Pennsylvania. This is Pennsylvania 7. Pennsylvania 7 is the area around is one of those districts near Philadelphia. Kurt Weldon, the incumbent Republican there, had been there a while. Joe Sestak, his challenger, has won. You see the margin there. That's based on the raw vote with half the precincts in. That may not be anything like as big a margin when all is said and done, but we projected it will be big enough that Joe Sestak will be the new congressman from the 7th District of Philadelphia. And for more on Pennsylvania, for more on that district, what it is and what this race's outcome says, let's turn to Michael Barone. Michael?
Yeah, Brett. Pitch it to me again. Which district are we talking about?
Talking about Pennsylvania 7, where we're projecting now that Weldon is a loser to Joe Sestak. He had been in trouble. We've known that. And of course, we don't know what the final margin is going to be, but what is that district like, and what does that tell us about how other races in that same vicinity might go?
Well, that's close-in suburbs southeast of Philadelphia. Includes most of Delaware County, which is historically Republican, which voted for John Kerry. It's been trending Democratic as people move out from Philadelphia. It also includes some of Chester County and Montgomery County. It appears that of the Delaware County precincts in now Sestak, the Democrat, has 55% of the vote. He's essentially running about where John Kerry did 2 years ago. There's no Chester County numbers in yet, but it doesn't appear that they could suffice even if Weldon carried that area to win.
Okay, Mike.
That's farther out, more upscale suburbs.
Now, we've got two other suburban Philadelphia districts that are in play tonight that have been, one of them is the 6th District where Jim Gerlach is the Republican incumbent. The other, Mike Fitzpatrick, a young Republican incumbent in there as well. If Weldon loses, does that suggest to you that given the configuration and the kind of population you have in those areas, that those two guys are in deeper trouble than we might have known?
Well, I think that they've got demographically districts that are somewhat more Republican, that the Weldon had particular problems because of charges that he'd steered lobbying business to his daughter and so forth. In the 6th District, Gerlach, what we're showing now is the Democrat Lois Murphy ahead. She's leading in Montgomery County, which is the inner suburbs, lower Marion, and it's an area with a lot of very rich people that has trended more and more liberal as time goes on, large Jewish population. She's carried that before and hasn't won, but she's also winning in Berks County. This is really a little beyond the Philadelphia area going into Reading. It's John Updike country. Jim Gerlach has carried that area before, campaigned hard there. So far in the initial returns doesn't seem to be working for him. Caveat, no Chester County returns yet in, which is the most Republican of those three counties, and we don't know which parts of those counties, which kind of precincts are in.
So, Michael, we do know one more thing from Pennsylvania. This is the 10th District. This is the district of incumbent Republican Congressman Don Sherwood, who had been damaged, as you know, by a scandal involving his having a mistress and all the stuff that goes with that. We project, well, this is the, I'm sorry, this is the Ohio district. We're projecting Ohio, I'm sorry, we're calling this Ohio House race. This is the 18th Congressional District. We're projecting a gain here by Zach Space in the district formerly occupied by Bob Ney. That is in the eastern part of Ohio there, a very rural district. And we're projecting that Zach Space will win out over Joy Padgett, the Republican candidate. That was one of those endangered Midwestern seats, Michael. And let me look also at this Pennsylvania. This is the Don Sherwood seat I was mentioning a minute ago. That's Congressional District 10. That is above and away from Philadelphia a bit. And we're projecting that Don Sherwood, and this was one of those races that was thought to be a loser for the Republicans, and it has turned out to be that way. Michael, your thoughts on those two races?
Well, those are two scandal seats, Britt. If you had approached anybody of either party in December '04 and said, are those two seats going to go Democratic, they would have said you got to have hole in your head to believe that. But that Ohio district, as you point out, kind of hilly country in southeast Ohio between Columbus and the Ohio River, but not including either of those areas.
That's the Bob Ney seat, and he, of course, resigned in disgrace just the other day after being indicted, right?
And he was replaced on the ballot by the Ohio Republican Party by Joy Padgett, who had been a state legislator. Turns out, I believe, that she had filed for bankruptcy recently, so she was not, let's say, the ideal candidate. Zach Space, the winner of the Democratic primary, was well positioned to win, and he did win. That about a 55%. The Don Sherwood district's northeast Pennsylvania. It goes from Pike County, which is fast-growing area, people fleeing New York taxes and New Jersey taxes are moving there, west across the upper border, heavily Republican district. Sherwood's problems too much to overcome.
Okay, Michael Barone, thanks very much. We got to take a brief break. Back with more reporting, more calls, and more discussion. Stay tuned. We got a quick call we can make in a House race. This out in Ohio. This is no great surprise, a Democrat holding on to that seat, but we're trying to give you what House calls we can when we can. This is a hold. This was not a battleground seat or an especially dramatic challenge mounted by Republican Blasdell there. So that's not one that we're glad to pass it on to you, but it doesn't change the balance of power in any notable way. In the meantime, we're watching this. This is getting exciting. We're up to 91% of the raw vote counted in Virginia, and we have George Allen with about a 31,000 vote lead over Jim Webb. You know, it's beginning to get high enough now that you can begin to look at 30,000 as meaningful. Of course, you don't know exactly what's outstanding and how big particular precincts might be, but 9% left to count. That's enough for Webb to certainly overtake him. It's too close to call, but he begins to look a little bit meaningful. Bill, your thoughts on that race and the overall picture there?
Well, it's just exciting with in this day of exit polls and projections to actually see, like in the old days, a real race with the vote adding up and trying to calculate in one's head, you know, there are about 175,000 it looks like votes left. Webb would have to win that remainder of the vote by 30,000. It does seem to be closing gradually. Those votes must be coming in from slightly Democratic areas. Right. But at the rate it's going right now, it's going to be very, very close. It would be amazing, I would say, though, if the Republicans hold the Senate, because George Allen beats back Webb after all the troubles he's had in that campaign.
One man who campaigned absolutely tirelessly for Republicans across the country was Senator John McCain of Arizona, widely thought to be a likely presidential contender in 2 years. And he is now with our Chris Wallace. Chris, Senator McCain.
Thank you, Britt. And Senator McCain, let me welcome you. There obviously are Democratic pickups tonight, the possibility still that they may take control of the House and or the Senate. How do you read these election returns tonight, sir?
I read them, of course, as disappointing, and from a personal standpoint, I really am sad about losing someone like Mike DeWine, who is a wonderful senator and a dear friend. But I think this is because many of our voters have begun to believe that we value power over principle, and that we came to Washington to reform the government, and we became part of the government. And one of the reasons why our base is not happy is because of the out-of-control spending. Of course, the war in Iraq overlays much of this, and I understand people's frustration. I'm frustrated. All of us are frustrated, but I still believe that if we lose there, it is a recipe for disaster, and we need to find a way through it. But I do not believe we can leave without having severe consequences throughout the world.
If voters are calling for change in Iraq tonight, and most of the exit polls indicate that there is at least a plurality, if not a majority, that supports change, opposes the war in Iraq, what kind of change do you think they want?
Well, that's the question, because they're obviously frustrated. I'm frustrated. You're frustrated. The majority of Americans are frustrated because we have not been able to install a democratic government there, and we're going to have to figure out ways to do it, and we're going to have to, probably in a bipartisan fashion if we can, but most importantly recognize that if you leave, it's not like Vietnam. You came home from Vietnam and it was over. These people are interested in our destruction, and I don't think there's any doubt that chaos in the region, which it would spread to, would threaten our national security interests. And I understand how unpopular that statement is, but it's something that I can, all the years and experience and knowledge that I have leads me to that conclusion, and literally every military expert I know.
Senator, you have always said, and I have questioned you about this repeatedly on Fox News Sunday, when are you going to decide about 2008? You always say after the 2006 elections. Well, I just checked, the polls are officially closed in Arizona, so what about it?
I'll let you know early next year, but could I just add, Chris, look, we've taken setbacks before. In '76, we lost just about everything, and Ronald Reagan gave us new direction, new focus. We get back to our conservative principles, which I still think the majority of Americans share. We're gonna come right back, and we'll learn, we'll listen to the voters, and I think we've got a very vibrant and strong party and a philosophy that works. We just got to get back to it.
But let me ask you about that, because you bring up a very interesting question. 1974 was a debacle for Republicans, and the answer was this fella from out west, outside of the Republican establishment in Washington, who did bring change and new ideas. What about you? Are you part of the solution or part of the problem, sir?
All of us Republicans are going to sit down together and listen to the voters, get the message from tonight, and we're going to shape not a new agenda, but a return to the principles and philosophy of what we stand for and believe in. Less government, lower taxes, less regulation, strong national defense, be more careful stewards of the taxpayers' dollars, stop this profligate spending. I wanted a Medicare prescription drug program for people who needed it. Well, we gave them one, which is multi-trillion-dollar addition to the deficit. We got to get back to our conservative principles, and I know of no better guide than one Ronald Reagan.
Senator McCain, well, of course, he isn't going to be on the ballot, but Senator McCain, you may be. Thank you so much for coming on tonight, and we'll be pouring over the entrails for some time to come. Thanks again, sir.
Thank you, Chris.
Britt?
Chris, thanks to you, and thanks to Senator McCain as well. It's good to have him. Good to have you, Chris. We're keeping an eye as we go here, obviously, on that Virginia Senate race, which is turning into be the most exciting and suspenseful one of the night, because we have so much vote in, and we think we may be, getting to the point where we may have a real indication. We're also keeping an eye on a couple of congressional districts in Florida. Bill Kristol, your thoughts about, I guess it's Florida 22 is one in particular. The Florida, I guess it was 16 held for the Republicans in a situation that looked bad, or do I have that wrong?
13 held,
Florida 13,
I think.
excuse
That's
me.
the Catherine Harris district.
Yeah, that held for the Republicans. Your thoughts about 22 and the other Florida races that we're looking at there on your board there, your power play board?
The Republicans are trailing slightly in Florida 22, which is Clay Shaw's district. It's always been a pretty close district. Looks like they may not take all three in Florida. And 16, which is the Foley, you vote for Foley, but you mean to vote for Negron.
Yeah, see,
seems
there
to be just about
76% of the turns in there, Bill, as you can see, and Shaw trailing by 7,000 votes. That's still awfully close, but it does suggest that that's either going to be a cliffhanger or a pickup for the Dems.
Right, it looks like that could be.
Right.
But equally striking are these two Georgia seats, really the only possible Republican pickups from the Democrats, Georgia 8 and Georgia 12, where I believe the real vote now is a slight edge for the Republicans. If we can look at the real vote, that would be interesting.
Well, it may come up in the cycle. We may be here. We got a couple of boards here.
Right.
Yeah, you see, that's a 3,000 vote margin with 56% in. I'm not sure what the population of that district is, but that's very close. But you see 3,000 amounts to 4 percentage points, so it's meaningful.
Right.
So it may be that, as you say, that could be a pickup. Also, CD 12 there, that's Max Burns running there to try to knock off the incumbent Democratic Congressman Barrow. And he's similarly, roughly the same number in. He's up by 4 percentage points and 58% counted. So
what just strikes me again is the degree to which it looks like the South may save the Republicans, minimize the worst case scenarios in the House. People like me who thought they were going to lose 40, they may not lose quite as many. And in the Senate, of course, if they hold the Senate, it will be because of Virginia and Tennessee, it looks like, if Allen hangs on,
and
in
the
Virginia and Corker hangs on in Tennessee.
Right,
so the South and the border states.
Possibly the border state of Missouri, right. Yeah.
Right. The blowout belt, which is now extends from the Northeast, Connecticut, through Pennsylvania, Indiana, Ohio. It'll be a bad night, it looks like, for Republicans in the Northeast and the Midwest. It'll be interesting. It means the Republican delegation in both the House and the Senate will be even more Southern than before. I don't know if that's good or bad, but it means the South is really the heart now.
And in furtherance of just what you're saying, we're looking at two further Democratic pickups. One is in the 24th District in New York, where we're predicting that the Democrats will pick that seat up. And I'm not sure that's been one of the ones that's been thought to be particularly embattled, but we would now project that one for the Democrats, adding yet one more. And in New Hampshire, where veteran Republican Congressman Charlie Bass has been in the fight of his life. We predict that he loses tonight, so that's a further pickup for the Democrats, adding to their already growing total. We're going to take a brief break now. We'll be back with more in a moment. Stay tuned. Okay, we're back now, and just getting a sense now of what we need to do to solidify this picture. I want you to take a look, folks, on your screen at that yellow stripe there, where you see the words balance of power. And as we watch that through the evening, that will tell you what the two parties still need. You see now the Democrats are within 5 seats of taking control of the House of Representatives and within 3 of getting control of the Senate. Their margin and room for error for the Democrats is much greater, much greater in the House, where there are many more targets of opportunity still out there for them than there are in the Senate, where it's down to a handful of seats. They could win them, there's no question about that. Republicans are going to need to hold, it's down to really the 3 races, Missouri, Tennessee, and Virginia. And we're watching with really now bated breath the outcome in all 3 of those. In Virginia, the count has reached north of 90% of the vote in, and George Allen continues to cling to a lead, but it is so narrow. In one tabulation we've just heard about from the Secretary of State's office, with something like 92% of it's in, it's down to 18,000 votes. That's not meaningless, but it's tight. So those are the ones we're looking at. And in the meantime, also, as we have all evening, we've been keeping an eye on ballot initiatives. So we've noted that a couple of marriage amendments, those confining it to a man and a woman, have passed in Tennessee and in Virginia. But there are others out there, and our chief Washington correspondent, Jim Angle, has been keeping an eye on them. Jim?
Well, that's right, Britt. And I should mention that the turnout for some of those ballot initiatives, especially in Missouri, could affect the outcomes of those races. We'll get to those in a moment. First, Fox News is projecting that 2 state ballot initiatives raising the minimum wage will indeed pass. First, we go to Ohio, which already has now, you've got a 44% margin on this. They would raise the state minimum wage to $6.85. The current federal minimum wage is $5.15. In Missouri, the margin is even greater at the moment. It's in the 70 percentile in favor of raising their minimum wage to $6.50. Here you see the results there, 72 to 28 to raise it to $6.50. Now, those are just 2 of several around the country for minimum wage, which some thought would help to bring out Democratic voters. But there are all sorts of ballot initiatives still out there that we want to tell you about. If you look at the number of initiatives across the country, we have a graphic here that will show you the number of states and the kinds of issues they are looking at. Stem cell research, of course, in Missouri, one of the keys for the outcome in that race between McCaskill and Senator Talent. There you have Senator Talent running ahead by about the same margin as the stem cell research motion, which amendment to the state constitution, which he opposes and Claire McCaskill favors. So that could be key. Gay marriage, you have 8 states in which that is an issue. We have already projected a win for gay marriage amendments banning gay marriage in Tennessee and Virginia. You also have a number of other issues around the country, in addition to the ones we've already mentioned on minimum wage. Here you have eminent domain, which is one of the biggest issues here. And Britt, this is a really interesting one. People were really incensed by the Supreme Court case, Kelo versus New London, Connecticut, and people are really angry about this and are determined to have their state governments ban eminent domain or restrict it so severely that it makes it almost impossible.
Okay, Jim Angle, thanks very much. We'll be keeping an eye on all of those things. In the meantime, a victory celebration for Senator Joe Lieberman, a man who in some quarters was given up for dead not many months ago when he lost his party's nomination. But he ran as an independent, and there he is.
And not only that, I deeply appreciate this election. Thank you, Jimmy Ammon. Thank you, Mike Jarjura. Thank you, John Picard, Kevin Cunningham, Mike Coffey, and Herb Grant, and the group from the Norwalk Common Council, and so many others from public life who are up here. Dear friends, Thanks to the labor leaders who are with me. And the firefighters of Connecticut. Including their great national president who chose to be with us here tonight, Harold Schaitberger. Thank you. Dear friends, this year's campaign, to say the obvious, was a long journey on which you, my dear supporters, and I were tested like never before, but we never wavered in our beliefs or in our purpose, did we? And we never gave up, did we? And tonight, thanks to the voters of Connecticut, our journey has ended in victory and hope and the opportunity to make a difference for 6 more years.
And so Senator Joe Lieberman, basking in the glory of victory on a year in which he suffered what many thought would be a humiliating and possibly crushing defeat at the hands of Ned Lamont, who took the Democratic nomination away from him on a wave of anti-war in Iraq votes. Senator Lieberman returned to the Senate as an independent. All of us know Senator Lieberman, have known him for a long time. He's one of the members of the Senate who is particularly comfortable around reporters, has done a bit of writing in his own time, including a biography of the great Democratic state chairman from the 60s, John Bailey of Connecticut. So Joe Lieberman is a man that all of us know and many of us like. And it has been an interesting saga indeed. And it is fair to say he's thanking the unions and the firefighters and all kinds of state officials there, which shows you that a lot of the politics still is local.
Right.
But I think it's fair to say that if the Republicans hadn't backed him and the Republican Party in the White House had not cut off the air hose of the poor Republican in that race so that he had virtually no support, Joe Lieberman would not be coming back to the U.S. Senate.
I don't think there's any question, and I think that when Ned Lamont looks at this, he says if the Republican hadn't been in the race, I think the Republican got like 10% of the vote. That would have put Ned Lamont over the top. But so what you're looking at here is it's a kind of a difficult victory for the Republicans. Yes, Joe Lieberman's going back, but they say he's going to caucus with the Democrats. And I don't think he's going to be very welcomed by Democrats. This is a guy who left behind the Democratic Party, did not accept the judgment of Democrats. And again, we come back to the war issue. This was his issue. He says he's above politics now. You're not above politics in Washington. So Joe Lieberman's a terrific guy. But in terms of the politics of this moment, I think that he has run in a way that benefited Republicans. It reminds me a little bit of the White House support of Lincoln Chafee in Rhode Island.
No, look,
well, wait a second.
On every issue except the war and other foreign policy issues, Joe Lieberman is a Democrat. He's a Democrat on the environment. He's a Democrat on
what's the big issue in this campaign?
Choice. Well, okay. Iraq was a big issue in the campaign, but he is not. He is going to caucus with the Democrats. If the Democrats shun him in any way, I think it's crazy, and I don't think they will, because I think they need all the support that they can get.
Well, if they only pick up the Senate by a vote or two, they're sure not going to shun Joe Lieberman.
Absolutely. And he he's been a Democrat all his life, but I think he's got the formula that both parties ought to be working on in Washington, which is to get problems solved on a bipartisan basis, on an independent basis, instead of this polarization stuff. I think the country is fed up with it, of constant warfare between the parties, fighting over
so you think
practically everything and not getting...
You think the countries are divided because the politicians are divided and not the other way around?
I think it's both, but the politicians do not contribute to solving the public's problems like entitlements, the energy problem, the environmental problem. You've got to solve it on a bipartisan basis.
Hold it, Bill Kristol.
2 points apart from all this edifying sermon here from Warren about how everyone should be nice to everyone. Lieberman got a lot of advice from some Democrats. Don't mitigate or mute your support for the war in Iraq, and mute your support for victory, and move towards a kind of get out, a modified get out. type message. He refused to do that. He rejected that advice. He stayed a strong supporter of the war, a critic of the tactics, but a strong advocate of the need to win in Iraq. That ended up benefiting him, and that I think is a lesson
Well,
for
it
a
ended
lot
up
of.
benefiting because it kept Republicans at his side.
It kept
the White
Republicans
House on
decided,
his side.
and it even kept 30% of Democrats by his side. He did better by standing on his principles. Second thing, looking at that victory celebration, what I was reminded of was Lamont's victory celebration on primary night. And as one Democrat said to me today, the advance man for Ned Lamont, who let Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson stand behind him in the TV shot, who are not Connecticut residents and are not really in the mainstream of the Democratic Party, who let them be the framing for Ned Lamont on primary night. Lamont, that was the beginning of Lamont's loss of momentum, I think.
We're going to take a break here, but before we do, we're going to make a call. This is to prove that Republicans can still win in the state of Indiana. This is, of course, is Mark Souder, a conservative Republican from out there. This was not, I should acknowledge, folks, a seat in which the Democrats thought they had a big chance of picking up, but it is a hold for the Republicans, and I'm sure that on this night they are very glad to have it indeed. Let's take a break. Be right back. Oh my goodness, Fox News, you decide 2006 coverage up in lights above Times Square. Let's hope that when we pop up, we don't frighten the horses. Got to take a look now at three races, which are the key races for the Senate. This is Talent McCaskill in Missouri, 29% of precincts in. Talent leading by some, 55,000 votes there, according to that. Not enough to make a call, and we don't expect to be able to make one for some time. In the Ford Corker race in Tennessee, that's 56,000, now 59,000 votes with nearly 70% in. It looks like Corker's got a very good chance of winning, still too close to call. And the closest devil of all, the one we're all watching with nearly bated breath, is George Allen with a 28,000 vote lead with 95% of those counted. There's some tallies that are a little forward of this that show it has tightened even further. And we're going to check in with somebody who may be able to tell us a little bit about why, even at this late stage of the game, we can't call the race. It probably has something to do with where the outstanding vote still yet to be counted is. Michael Barone, what do you know?
Well, Brett, I've been looking at the state of Virginia's election board website to try and figure out where the outstanding precincts are out. And what I see is a balance. Now, precincts are not necessarily the same size in Virginia. They seem to be much bigger than precincts in some other states. But on the one hand, you've got a set of precincts in the 3rd Congressional District. That's the black majority district that goes from Hampton Roads to Richmond. So you've got a certain amount of districts there, 3 in Newport News, 4 in Portsmouth. You've got several in 16 in Richmond. Those are likely to go heavily for Jim Webb. I think we can be pretty clear of that. On the other hand, you've got some rural Virginia ones. You've got 11 in the Northern Neck areas, a Republican area, 3 in Virginia Beach, which Allen has been carrying the rest of, 8 in Chesapeake, which is another suburb there in the Hampton Roads area that Allen's been carrying, 7 in Henrico County. That's mostly a Republican area, but there's some middle-class blacks there that vote heavily Democratic. 11 in Craig County on the West Virginia border. That's heavily Republican.
Henrico County, Michael, that's Richmond suburbs, right?
Richmond suburbs, yeah. So those areas tilt Allen. Maybe those 2 areas will counterbalance. And what else have we got? Well, in the D.C. metro area, Arlington, Alexandria, very heavily Democratic. They're all counted. Those precincts are in. Only 3 precincts in Fairfax, 2 in Fairfax County and 1 in Fairfax City. Those went for Webb. Probably a few more votes. What we've got is 32 precincts from Loudoun County, one of the fastest growing counties in the country, around Leesburg, west of Fairfax County, 33 precincts in Prince William County. And Britt, the pre-existing vote there in the precincts that have been counted, the last I saw in Loudoun, it was 50-48 Webb. In Prince William, it was 49-49. So we don't know what those outstanding precincts in Loudoun and Prince William are going. But when I do a sort of sketch it in my head, add up here, and look at the current Allen margin, I get somewhere down to where I got in Florida in 2000 when I did an exercise like this, and I thought that the Republicans' lead was headed down towards 0. I think that this is a race that could end up with a recount, and that it may take, just to pick a figure out of the air, 36 days for us to know who's won this race.
Oh boy, just what we need. 36 days to know who might be in charge of the Senate.
And if the majority of the Senate depends on on it, you can count on it being seriously contested.
Well, I'm glad it's real close to us where we have a bureau nearby and we can cover it if it's in Virginia. All right, Michael, that's wonderful.
That's right.
News.
We've got
wonderful information. Thank you.
95 counties and 39 independent cities, 134 jurisdictions. That'll need a lot of lawyers.
I'll say. Well, who covers this stuff for us? Carl Cameron covers this stuff for us, our chief political correspondent. He's been watching the Senate races, and this one in particular. Carl, what do you got, buddy?
Well, I want to make a point here, Britt, that I was not the one who raised the R word. Recount came out of Michael Barone's mouth before I did it. But I tell you, the statutes in Virginia are very clear on this. After the vote is certified, if the margin is within 1% of the total votes counted, then the candidate who loses can call for the recount, and there it goes. Yesterday, Charles Schumer, the chairman of the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, made it very clear in his words, we are not going to be caught unawares. There are hundreds of Democratic lawyers, probably thousands really when you add the state and the federal lawyers all together, who are ready to be dispatched and parachute into any place they need to go. Virginia would be a little bit convenient since so many of them are going to be based in Washington. But the same thing could be said about Missouri. The same thing may be said about any of these close races. And Republicans have an equal complement of attorneys ready to get right in there. So it may be a late night. It may be a long November.
Have you heard anything out of that state, though, Carl, about irregularities, about any funny business that might be the basis of a challenge of the results along those lines?
Well, there have been a number of hiccups. There have been voter complaints in a variety of places. Charges from Republicans of voter fraud, which is to say that Democrats perhaps had tampered with registration or getting voters to the polls, and charges of intimidation by Democrats suggesting that Republicans were trying to suppress the Democratic voter turnout. We haven't had any major calamities. There have been allegations and threats of lawsuits in Missouri and a number of other states, but not yet in Virginia.
Hey.
But it's not midnight yet.
Okay, Carl, thanks very much. Going to take a break. Be right back.
Among the things being decided tonight, some of the governor's races. 36 are up for grabs in total, and 10 of those were open, 9 held by Republicans. And we can report to you now that one of those houses in Iowa has now been decided. A Democrat in that case had been stepping down. Fox News now projecting that a Democrat will reclaim the seat. Chet Culver prevailing, according to our polling, by over Jim Nussle by a healthy margin. Again, in Arkansas, another Democratic pickup. This one, we are projecting that Democrat Mike Beebe will prevail over Asa Hutchinson, the former Undersecretary at Homeland Security, replacing a Republican governor in that state, Mike Huckabee. And finally, in Colorado, Fox News projecting another Democratic pickup. Democrat Bill Ritter has prevailed over Republican Bob Bupre. Republicans very much wanted that Colorado seat. Bupre had been running strong in the polls initially, petered out at the end, and was basically 19 points behind as of yesterday. So the Democrats with 2 pickups there, Arkansas and Colorado. In total, that gives the Democrats at this point 6 pickups among the governorships, including in Maryland, in Massachusetts, Ohio, New York, Arkansas, and Colorado. 6 Democratic pickups, and that means, Britt, that if the Democrats don't lose another single seat tonight, or if they do lose 2 seats and no more, that they will have reclaimed, I should say, the majority of the nation's governorships for the first time since 1994. Britt.
Megan Kendall, thanks very much.
You bet.
We got a call we can make. This is no big surprise. Dennis Hastert has won re-election. He was not thought to be in any serious trouble. He, of course, is now the Speaker of the House, but if the present trend continues, he will no longer be the Speaker of the House. And there are all kinds of questions about what role he would play in the leadership of the Republicans as a minority, many people believing he wouldn't play much of a role at all. For more on the Senate and the situation there, Carl Cameron is in a position now to talk to the Senate Minority Leader, who is, of course, has high hopes tonight. He may be, before it's all over, the Senate Majority Leader. Carl?
Thanks, Britt. Speaking of legislators who aren't exactly sure what their role might be in the upcoming Senate, the Senator from Nevada, Harry Reid, thank you very much for joining us, sir.
Well, I know what my role will be. I'm going to be the Democratic leader.
That's for sure, but we don't know if it's a minority or a majority.
Well, I've never predicted that we'd be in the majority. I mean, it's still possible, but I think it's going to be we have 4 seats that still haven't been decided. We'd have to win most all those, and a couple of them are looking a little weak right now. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. If someone had told you 2 years ago that we would not have to worry about the 2 Nelsons in Nebraska and Florida and Minnesota would not be on anyone's lip this election period. And of course, North Dakota would be no problem, and Senator Byrd would be no problem. They're no problem. Nobody even talks about those. And to think that we're already at a +3 is remarkable. What we've done in 2 years, I'm very happy about that.
Reading between the lines in the politics of interpreting lowballing there, it sounds as though you're prepared to not make it to 6.
Well, I've never been prepared to make it to 6. I can do the job. I'm happy to do that. As the Democratic whip, I've been in the majority, I've been in the minority, I've been tied. I've done it all. And so whatever the people decide, I'm ready to do that. But one thing the people decide tonight, they're in the air, there's change of direction. And I think that the message to the American people should be, a one-party town doesn't work. It simply doesn't work. The right wing control the Republican Party. They would not even treat their own moderates with civility. And so I have already reached out to Mitch McConnell. I did it before the break. I said, Mitch, no matter how the election turns out, we've got to do better than what we've done.
We should explain that Mitch McConnell would be the Republican leader.
He's my counterpart. And we need to recognize that the only way to legislate is on a bipartisan basis. And the president certainly should have the message that we got to change direction in Iraq and here at home. When you have the Army Times, the Air Force Times, the Navy Times editorialize against Rumsfeld yesterday, the president has to get the message we've got to change direction in Iraq and here at home.
Let's talk about the practical effect of the Democrats potentially taking over the House, and if the Senate were to remain Republican. We now have even more divided government in that the 2 chambers would be controlled by opposite parties. What is the practical effect of that in terms of the president's perspective? Can Democrats actually change anything? He still has the power of the veto pen as well as the bully pulpit.
The president has to realize that these past 6 years have not been days of progress for our country. And the president, I believe, and I certainly am willing to work with him. We've had a few rocky roads in the past, but I'm willing to work with the president. I really want to do what he said he wanted to do when he came to town. I want to be a unifier, not a divider. And I hope that we can do that.
Let's talk a couple of things about what the new Senate might look like in terms of the issues that are likely to come up. First of all, investigations. If Democrats do have the majority, there's an expectation that you'll be required by Democrats across the country to look into what happened. Is that part of the investigative agenda?
What we need to do is realize that for 6 years we've had no legislative branch of government. Under the Constitution, we have 3 separate and equal branches of government for checks and balances. The number one thing we need is congressional oversight. This doesn't mean the flurry of subpoenas. It means basic congressional oversight to find out what's going on with the war in Iraq, with Halliburton. We'll find out what's going on in the various departments within this government. Regular congressional oversight. And from that, do some legislation that's good and bipartisan.
And we still don't know who will have the control to have that subpoena power regardless of party. Britt, we're going to send it back to you in New York. Thank you very much, Senator Reid, the Democratic leader.
I'd pass along my thanks as well to Senator Reid, and thanks to you, Carl. In the meantime, our colleague Steve Brown is in the town of Frontenac, Missouri, right near St. Louis at Talent headquarters, where we got a real cliffhanger. Steve, what can you tell us?
Well, Britt, this is turning out to be a classic Missouri election night, especially when you're talking about statewide races. In this case, the Republican Jim Talent, just like almost every election year, when you're running statewide in this state, the Republican districts or the Republican areas and Republican counties come in early, spot you a lead, and then the Democratic votes come in. According to the website for the Secretary of State's office, they report no votes from St. Louis or Kansas City counted yet. So what the Republicans need to do, in a sense, is get a huge margin outside of those 2 areas. For example, Talent has gotten a 10,000 vote margin from Greene County in southwest Missouri. Also in Newton County, also in southwest Missouri, a 7,100 vote margin. Cape Girardeau, a 9,000 vote margin. They're still counting the vote down there. Cumulatively, you have to start building up that margin, because late in election night, in comes the St. Louis votes, in comes the Kansas City votes, and in come a lot of those Democratic votes. It eats away at that lead built up over the course of the evening. They're taking a look at some key districts in suburban areas, and to be quite honest with you, I think the number's a little disappointing for the Republican camp. In St. Charles County, just outside of St. Louis, a thin margin, a relatively shallow margin for talent there, where it was thought he needed to pick up a more substantial kind of margin. South of St. Louis County, in Jefferson County, Claire McCaskill has a pretty sizable lead with about 60% of the vote counted down there. That was a county in her failed gubernatorial bid 2 years ago. She only took by 18 votes. She's improved her standing there. The question is, what is it going to look like in terms of turnout in both Kansas City and St. Louis? And I got to tell you that our affiliates there were both reporting that turnout in the city precincts was pretty heavy. Britt?
Steve, thank you very much. That's very revealing about what's not in Missouri, and it points to better things ahead, at least when the St. Louis and Kansas City areas come in. Those areas do tend to vote heavily Democratic. She's trailing now by 52,000 votes, and a margin that could be easily overcome, I think it's fair to say, by the voting from those two big areas. And as Steve said, the Secretary of State is reporting that nothing is in. We got a couple of races we're going to look at here. In Nevada, this is not a surprise that the incumbent Republican Senator John Ensign has won re-election over President Carter's son Jack, as he was expected to. Arizona, this is the 8th district in Arizona. This is a pickup for the Democrats, and one of those seats out west where there was worry that the Republicans might not be able to hold it, and high hopes that they would, and it seems that that is going to go the other way, adding yet one more to the count for the Republicans in the House. And in Florida, this is a big disappointment for the Republicans. That's the Fort Lauderdale district. Clay Shaw, a veteran member, one of those in line to possibly head the House Ways and Means Committee, and now it appears he won't be on the House Ways and Means Committee because he won't be in Congress, and that Ron Klein has won that seat. And Heath Shuler has beaten the Republican Charlie Taylor. That's in the Asheville, western part of North Carolina, in the mountains around there. Heath Shuler is a former quarterback for the Washington Redskins. He campaigned as a very conservative Democrat and has won. 34 years old. You can see he's from Waynesville, North Carolina. He's a Baptist. I think it's fair to say he's an evangelical Christian, and he campaigned really as a pretty much an out-and-out conservative. So another victory for the Democrats in that particular race, but not a victory for the cause of liberalism, at least if Heath Shuler is an example of it.
Republicans tried to recruit him as a candidate several years ago, and I'm sure they wish they'd gotten him. The picture there of Charlie Taylor, I think, was somebody else. He's an older fellow.
I thought either that's Charles Taylor's son or Charles Taylor many, many years ago.
The most interesting, though, of those races, besides the Shuler race, was Arizona 8. This is the district. It had been held by Jim Colby, a moderate Republican. It's right on the Arizona border with Mexico. It is probably the district in this country that has more illegal immigrants coming across it than any other in the country. And Randy Graff, the Republican who was lost, had one big issue, and it was the immigration issue. He was a member of the Minutemen, and he defeated some sort of hand-picked White House candidate who was a more moderate, who they thought might win, but he won
in the primary.
And so there he was out there, and so it is one where I think this a very restrictionist immigration message that he had was rejected.
And in a place where one would think there'd be a high degree of sensitivity.
Absolutely.
But of course, there's also, now you have to ask yourself the question of how much of an Hispanic American population there was in that district as well, which could have certainly advantaged the Democrats.
Well, remember, this was a Republican-held district, however.
That's important to note. Indeed, that is. So let's look at our House balance of power bill. If you can update it for us on that wonderful little electronic chart you have there. We're working toward that now and we have yet another seat swinging. I guess we moved that Arizona seat, if you have it handy, into that category. But you can see now that the tally begins to mount, and we're talking now not probably about whether the House will go Democratic, but how much it will go Democratic. And that, of course, has been kind of the story we were expecting from fairly early in the evening. You got a whole bunch of pickups there. That's 9 already. With potentially more to come. Florida 22, which is over there on the right-hand side, still needs to be moved over. That's the Clay Shaw seat we were just talking about, and we can move that over into into the Democratic column. At least we hope we can, if we can get the thing to work. There
high
you
tech
go.
here, right?
This is pretty cool the way you're able
like
to do
that.
this. So I want to see you make some of those cool little yellow squiggly lines that have proved particularly insightful. But you see those others over there that are still there. You go. I like those.
You
little
like that?
squiggly.
Yeah.
They're cool. And you're getting better at them as the night goes on.
Basically, Democrats are going to win the House. Our own projection, I think we still say they need 2 seats. They just haven't been able to call those seats. But certainly the way it's going, the Democrats look like they're heading towards a 30-seat or so majority in the House.
30-seat pickup.
I'm sorry, a 30-seat pickup, which would be a 15-seat majority. If that were the pickup, that would exactly reverse the current Republican majority, to give people a sense of how easy or difficult it will be to govern with that kind of 15-seat majority.
Well, the
that looks like
Republicans
the
have been,
ballpark
what,
they're
232 to 202 with one nominal independent who sits with the Democrats. So they've had about a 29-seat margin.
Right.
And, of course, in the House, if you can keep your own troops in line with any kind of a margin, you can ram through whatever you want and run any kind of investigation you want.
Yeah.
But it doesn't guarantee you're going to get anything through the other body.
Right, and a 15-seat majority is not bad in the House. There have been smaller ones that the Republicans have had. On the other hand, as we've just been saying here, a lot of these new Democrats are moderate or even conservative, and they'll vote for things like a hike in the minimum wage or some very, small bore Democratic measures. But I don't think they're on board for cutting off funds in Iraq or for major big government programs. But the Senate will be, of course, will be so closely divided, it's hard to believe that any big legislation is going to be rammed through that body.
Hold it. I'm sorry, Juan. I'll come right back to you in a minute. We got a call we're able to make, and this is one that's of some note in New York. This is the 26th district, and this is Tom Reynolds, who was thought to be in fairly serious trouble against businessman Jack Davis there. He, of course, was someone who looked like he was way too close to Mark Foley. And it appears now, we now project that Tom Reynolds will win and survive in that seat. That was a potential pickup. I think that as the weeks wore on, Reynolds looked to be in increasingly better shape. I'm sorry, Juan, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Well, it's just to quickly say on that, that seat, I don't know how endangered it was. It was because people felt he hadn't acted quickly enough on Foley, but it would have been more of an embarrassment. That was not considered a seat that was going to make a big difference.
No, that was not considered a make or break seat anyway.
But go back to another point. So many conservative Democrats. Joe Sestak, the former admiral coming out of Pennsylvania.
He's the guy that beat who beat Kurt Weldon
who had been there 10 terms.
In the suburbs of Philadelphia.
Right, and then you go to Heath Shuler, and we just keep looking across the country, and what you see is that these are conservative Democrats, and these are conservative Democrats who are going to bring. But they're the young bloods coming in. But the ability to hold together and ram anything through. To go back to the idea of a majority of the majority, the old principle that Hastert used among Republicans, that's not going to work for this new group of Democrats coming in.
Another call to be made now in New York. This is the 20th district, and this is veteran Republican Congressman John Sweeney, and we predict that he is gone. So that's another pickup for and I think a quite unwelcome one for the Republicans. I think this is a seat that they figured on a night that if they were going to have any chance in the House, they were certainly going to have to hold this seat.
Well, and the reason was there's an 80,000 advantage of registered Republican voters in that district. And remember, this was a gerrymandered seat because Republicans and Democrats got together in New York and really decided, well, you'll get this seat and we'll get this seat. And this is one that Republicans thought they had. It shows you, though, that in the Northeast, registered Republicans are not quite the same as registered Republicans in the South. I mean, they're not necessarily conservatives, and that's one of the reasons Sweeney lost.
A couple more to call here. This is California Senate. No surprise here that this particular seat, but many of you didn't know that Dianne Feinstein was running. Dianne Feinstein is running, and she has won. Hawaii. There was even some late buzz on some blog that said that Daniel Akaka might lose, but he didn't lose. We project Daniel Akaka has won, and I suspect, given when the polls probably closed out there, probably won pretty handily, or we wouldn't be calling it so quickly. Late out in Hawaii. I mean, it's early out in Hawaii compared to here. It's like 6 o'clock. So we project Akaka the winner. Further thoughts on the picture?
Well,
it's down now, isn't it? It's down to the suspense is probably over about which way the House is going.
Right.
The only question is by how much.
Right.
But the suspense is on the Senate. This is getting to be quite a night.
We've got I count I don't know what Bill's got over there, but 13 House seats has gone over at the moment. So we need to find 2, and there certainly are enough hanging out there in Ohio and Connecticut and Pennsylvania, that the Democrats are definitely going to go over the top. It's a question, as you say, by how much. And there are a bunch of seats.
Let's go back, if we can, to the Allen Webb race in Virginia, just to keep abreast of the popular vote there. It might take us a minute to get it up on the screen, but this is down. We're north of 90% of the raw vote being counted there, and as Michael Barone was pointing out to us, it's a very mixed picture in terms of the places where votes are still outstanding. Now, we don't see anything in there in terms of the vote total, so that's a relatively useless board, so maybe we can dispense with that in favor of something that might tell us a little bit more. Last time we looked, it was up to 95+%, and the Secretary of State's office had the margin at something like 12,000. Bill, am I right?
Right. Last we looked, Allen had about a 12,000 vote margin with, if I could do the math right in my head, about 100,000 votes still to come. Mike Barone said a lot of those votes are coming from African American areas.
Now
in
that
Richmond.
has a 29,000 vote margin with 96% counted. The tabulations on the Secretary of State's website have been a little bit at variance with that. Probably we may be a little behind. I doubt that they're a little behind, but 29,000 vote margin with 4% outstanding could be overcome. It's not meaningless, though.
No, that would mean if it could be overcome if most of the outstanding precincts were basically African American precincts in Richmond or elsewhere that might go 90-10 Democratic. It's not going to be overcome if they're just a bunch of 55-45 precincts out, because
something interesting is happening in Maryland. The Washington Post, which apparently had projected, along with everybody else, that Ben Cardin would win, has withdrawn that projection, and Michael Steele, projections or no, has refused to concede.
This is getting more and more like 2000. Can I say the dreaded words? We have Virginia heading towards a recount. We have a projection being withdrawn in another state.
All we have now are 45% of the vote in, 315,000 to 293,000. This is interesting. Now the Post has pulled its projection back. We have not pulled ours back. If we begin to smell a rat, folks, we promise you, we will pull it back in a heartbeat. But we haven't yet done that. Maybe we can check in presently with Michael Barone to see what he can tell us about the places from which the votes are still to come. But there's probably a reason why Michael Steele is refusing to concede. He's not a hothead who refuses to concede just for the heck of it. He probably thinks he has real hope at this hour. Juan, your thoughts on that race?
Well, again, you see, I think that race is all about the black vote in two places. I've said this to you before, Britt. I think it's in Baltimore and Prince George's County. Prince George's County, adjacent to the District of Columbia, heavily populated by an affluent African-American population, many of them federal workers. And my guess is that what Michael Steele is saying is, wait a minute, let's see where these votes come in. A lot of these votes would come late. Let's see exactly how they register. A lot of times that what you see is the Democratic machine would say, oh, we'll deliver those votes late with the hope that they will help our candidate. But in this case, Michael Steele saying, I anticipate that I'm going to get 25%, and that's what he said to me. He thinks he can get 25-30% of that black vote. If that's the case, it might shift the numbers significantly.
Yeah, he's made an effort for the black vote as a Republican and as an African American, much greater than other candidates have who happen to be black Republicans. And he's brought in people like Mike Tyson, the boxer, to endorse him, and he got some hip hop entrepreneur.
Russell Simmons.
Yeah, Russell Simmons, and he got a number of Democratic officials, particularly in Prince George's County, that Juan was talking about. And it's true. In polls he'd been getting 14-15% of the black vote, but the black vote has always been very difficult to poll.
Well, and also, you know, this could be the beginning of something that Ken Mehlman has been trying to get going, and that is trying to de-link the black community automatically, as it has been for decades.
We were just
with
looking
the
at
Democratic Party.
We just saw a board go by, the tally go by, and that at the bottom of the screen it said Allen was up with 96%, up 12,000. That comports with what we've been hearing from the Secretary of State.
And I believe I saw that Thelma Drake had won the Southern Virginia election, which is a hold for the
That's
for the
an
Republicans.
important one for the Republicans. Thelma Drake down. That's Virginia Beach, which is an area that, unlike I guess next door Norfolk, Virginia Beach tends to be Republican.
It does, and of course there are a lot of military retirees. There's a huge naval base there. You know, Virginia. People may wonder why George Allen and as a Republican is doing so poorly. Of course, he had the problem with with the macaca statement and so on. The truth is, though, Virginia's elected 2 Democratic governors in a row.
Here we go, 13,000, 97% in. The Allen lead is shrunk to 13,000. Actually, that's maybe up a couple of votes from where it was, but we're down to 3% of the vote outstanding.
65,000 votes outstanding. Allen leading by 12 or 13. Again, if these districts are in any way representative of the state, Allen's okay. If they're all inner city districts, we could be just in a dead heat or even with a tiny Webb lead. We're now well within recount category, I would say. We're at a 0.5% lead, and I don't know what the Virginia law is, but I suspect we're going to get a recount.
Well, there had been worries that John Kyle might not be able to hold on to his seat, Republican seat, Senate seat in Arizona. We now project, however, that Kyle wins, which will be a relief to the Republicans. We really haven't had that as a we've had that among our seats in play, so that's an important hold for the Republicans in their efforts to keep control of the Senate.
Well, Kyle was worried because Peterson is a millionaire who spent a ton of his money, and that's what a candidate, even when he thinks he's in a safe seat, when you see some zillion out there ready to spend a bunch of it against you.
You got to be a zillionaire. In this day and age, millionaire, that's not, you can't, if you spend a lot of your money as a millionaire to try to get elected to the Senate, you'd spend it all.
I want to add one more thing.
Let me just add one thing on this, just to clarify this. I mean, the Democrats, remember, need 3 more seats to take control of the Senate. We're taking Arizona here off the chart because we've just called that for the Republicans. They now need to win 3 of 4, Montana, Missouri, Virginia, and Tennessee. Tennessee, Corker seems to have a reasonably stable lead. We're not calling it yet. If Tennessee stays Republican, 3 of 3, Montana, Missouri, Virginia.
Wow. Now, given the closeness of this Virginia race, this is probably a ridiculous question, but what the heck? Does Allen come out of this in any better shape for winning a squeaker, or does he just look like a guy whose national career is finished and he remains simply a senator and his presidential hopes dashed?
I think he needed to do a little better than this.
If he wins.
If he had said, if he'd gone through this horrible time when he was accused of using the N-word and so on, and had come back and won an impressive victory, that'd be one thing. Then he might have restored his ability to really run effectively in 2008. He hasn't done that. So I think as a presidential candidate, at least in the near future, well, he's not.
256 votes, something like that.
The great beneficiary of Allen's decline as a presidential candidate has been Mitt Romney of Massachusetts. And he's done what Bill Kristol said Allen should have done, and that is to move to the right and become a specific conservative, a hardline conservative almost on stem cells and abortion and all that. He's shifted his point of view, and I think he's eating the lunch that George Allen left on the table.
It's not hard to move right from Massachusetts, where he was governor.
Well, but he's moving
I think
quite to the right.
The problem with Allen is that now Allen, even if he holds on, he doesn't have the ability to make himself appealing out west in other strong Republican areas, and that's why he's gone. I think Mitt Romney obviously sets up against John McCain as someone who can appeal to the base. George Allen had that capacity. He really did.
Yeah, but he's young, and 2008 isn't the last presidential year where he'll be eligible to run. Now he can restore himself if he's an effective senator. I wanted to add one more thing about Virginia, Britt. The change in Virginia's
Hold
no
it a second,
longer
Fred. I got to
southern.
interrupt you. We now have a call to make. This is the write-in campaign, basically, for against Nick Lampson. This is the delay seat. And Sekula Gibbs, you had to write her in. It wasn't easy. The process was hard. We project now that Democrats pick up that seat. That was widely expected early on. And then as time went on, there was hope expressed that maybe they could manage to get enough people out to figure it out and to write it in and win. And we are now on the verge now of saying, we've been saying, that we're at 15, I believe. And we are now projecting officially that Democrats win control of the House. This has been a kind of a foregone conclusion for some hours, but we wanted to be able to have a chance to put it up in lights, and there you see it in front of our desk. Exciting things, folks. Now, we've been waiting to show you that or something like it all evening long. We would have done it, I must say. We would have done it just as with the fireworks as well, had it gone the other way, or even if the independents somehow miraculously gained control of one house or the other. So, There we go. Democrats get the House, as many had expected. As indeed we noted earlier that on all the projection cards of all the most noted prognosticators, all 5 of the big national prognosticators, they'd all projected one way or to one degree or another. So we projected will happen. Democrats have picked up the House. This will give us a chance to see. We expect to see, as a result of this, a number of new faces in the center seat at committee hearings in the House, gavels in hand. And in a minute here, we're going to look at a graphic which will show you who some of these new committee chairpersons will be, who the new leader of the House. Of course, we assume that Nancy Pelosi will be able to have enough members to vote for her that she'll be elected. We're going to get to all of that good stuff in just a minute, but now let's take a break. Stay tuned. Wow, fireworks and all. Now, that's all electronic, folks, but it certainly does look like real fireworks. Democrats have won control of the House. It's something that we kind of have known for some hours, but we now can officially say it, based upon a gain so far, final and projected of 15 seats. More are likely to come. In fact, the big question for the rest of the evening are really 2, who gets the Senate and how big will the margin be in the House. In the meantime, we can now discuss some of the ramifications of Democratic control of the House, including some key leadership and committee chairmanship positions. We were likely to get Nancy Pelosi as Speaker. We're likely to get Charles Rangel as the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. Alcee Hastings, a man who was impeached as a federal judge for bribery and ended up running successfully for the House. He's now risen in seniority to where he would be in line, at least, to become the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. And John Conyers, a man who is as liberal as they come among elected officials in Washington, would be the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. And Henry Waxman, who is about as energetic an investigator as anybody has seen in Washington and eager to get back to the job of doing it. He's been a subcommittee chairman before. He would now be the head of the Government Reform Committee. And he could be expected to have a lot of hearings before his committee and be very aggressive in the issuance of subpoenas, as indeed some of those others would. So now the question arises is, if this cast of characters, and it's only a partial list, were to assume the chairmanships that we indicated and do what we imagine that they would do, what would be the political effect of that over the next couple of years? Juan?
Well, I think that first of all, you got to remember that Nancy Pelosi has been, who's going to become Speaker, has said very clearly that she's not going to allow for impeachment hearings and the like. She thinks it's a distraction. But if you get people like John Conyers in that position, I think he'll have to be restrained by Pelosi. If you get Alcee Hastings as intelligent, I think, again, Pelosi's going to have to do something there because of the image is just as a difficult image, I think, for the party, and Alcee Hastings may have to be a team player and step aside there. Charlie Rangel's Ways and Means, the Republicans, and he got into it big time with Vice President Cheney, as you recall, over whether or not his ascension to the Ways and Means Committee chairmanship would mean a tax hike. Charlie Rangel said that's not the case. But
well, hasn't he also said, though, that he doesn't think that there's a single Bush tax cut that he thinks is worth extending?
That's correct. So we're talking about not extending tax cuts if you consider that a tax hike, however you want to put it.
If you were the beneficiary of one of the tax cuts, it would be a tax hike for you, buddy.
There you go.
And it would mean that the marriage penalty presumably would come back, right?
That's right.
Yeah, well, but that doesn't all happen until 2010. Which is a long way down the line. I mean, the Bush administration had been pushing for extension right now into that distant future, and Rangel is just putting all that stuff off.
I should interrupt to say the reason that says 217 to 1, and we're treating that as controlled by the Democrats, is that one is an independent, or it has been an independent seat, and he's always sat caucus with the Democrats. So that's what that's all about. That's why it looks like a tie, but it's not really. Just to explain that graphic. Sometimes graphics can be confusing. Often they're clarifying. So, Fred, your thoughts on this?
I think there's one threat that faces President Bush from a democratically controlled House, and it's this. I mean, the stuff they do proactively, he can veto, it can be blocked in the Senate or whatever. But spending, he needs their assent. And if they want to cut spending for Iraq and for the military, they can do it, and if they stick to it, there's nothing the president can do. And I think that's the biggest threat, to interfere with his Iraq policy.
Yeah, well, the other thing that they're definitely going to do is they are going to try to expose every flaw that's ever that's even been thought about in the Bush administration. There will be subpoenas flying like confetti toward the Bush administration, and cabinet officers and functionaries are going to be raising their right hand and being sworn under oath, and there's going to be investigations of practically everything, contracting in Iraq, the intelligence that led to the Iraq War, all the stuff that the Democrats have been complaining that the Republicans never did as to oversight. They're going to investigate. Interference with various agencies, the EPA and all of that, alleged attempts to sway scientific judgments by political means and stuff like that. They're going to try to discredit the Bush administration.
And what will be the political consequence of that? Will that be attractive to voters coming up in 08 or not?
It depends on what they find. You know, if they find legitimate scandals, then they're going to be vindicated. If they seem to be harassing, then they won't.
Hold on a second. We've got one more House race I want to call here. This is the 1st district in New Hampshire, and this is a gain for the Democrats. And yet adding one more, that puts them more than one past the total they needed. We expect more will be coming soon. We're going to go to a break, and when we come back, we're going to look back in on two what have become very interesting races now in Virginia and across the Potomac River in Maryland. Stay tuned. The House has gone Democratic, but the Senate is still out there. It is out there in 4 key races. Still too close to call in Missouri. Jim Talent clinging to a lead there, only less than half the precincts in, and many big ones yet to come. In Montana, that is still too close to call, although John Tester, the Democratic challenger, is ahead of Conrad Burns, Republican, only 4% in out there. Tennessee, Corker clings to a lead. It's about, what, 60,000, less than 60,000 votes, with 86% counted. Who knows where they're from? And Virginia, this thing is really getting close. It's we've looked at it since. It's down under 7,000 votes now with 98% in. And this is the most interesting one of all because one major newspaper, the Washington Post, has retracted a call that it made for Ben Cardin. Michael Steele, who is not a sore head, has refused to concede that race, even though a bunch of us, including Fox News, have called it. So it raises all kinds of intriguing questions about where outstanding vote in Maryland is. It could lead Michael Steele to believe he still has a real shot at winning. And who better to talk to about that than my colleague, Michael Barone. Michael, what do you think is going on in Maryland?
Well, in the first place, I suppose Michael Steele and his campaign may be focusing on the fact that they're ahead in the popular vote count so far, and there's still, I think, only 48% of the precincts reporting in Maryland. They haven't been tremendously speedy. I'm wondering whether or not Michael Steele is questioning some of the votes that have been tallied so far. In Prince George's County, that's the county with the largest black middle-class population of any county in America, suburban America. 45% of the vote counted. Michael Steele's only getting 25% of the vote there. That's only 2 points better than Bob Ehrlich, the governor of Maryland, got there 2 years before, which is the closest thing we have to a benchmark in a similar race in Maryland. And I think Steele is perhaps preparing some challenge to the legitimacy of the vote. Otherwise, I would have to say that I'm puzzled by his strategy. I think I'm just glancing over here. He's probably unhappy that Ben Cardin is carrying Baltimore County, the suburban ring around Baltimore, against him. That's Ben Cardin's home turf. But it's territory that Ehrlich carried 4 years ago, so he would want to carry.
So with the Washington Post withdrawing its call?
Again, I am puzzled by that. That's, you know, the Washington Post played a kind of an interesting role in that campaign, or non-role. When Michael Steele was supported by Wayne Curry, who was the Prince George's County executive, a Democrat for 8 years, retired voluntarily, highly popular with the business community and civic leaders in Prince George's County. I think it made the front page of the Metro section. It didn't make the front page of the newspaper as it did on the competitive Washington Times. perhaps the Washington Post is feeling a little tender about its treatment of Michael Steele.
Well, talk to us a little bit about what the ingredients are of the call we have made. I mean, we're looking at a board that shows Steele ahead. Now, obviously, there's not a lot in. So, based on that, with Steele ahead, why do we think, why does our decision team think that he's won, that Ben Cardin has won?
Well, if you pardon me occasionally while I glance over at my computer screen.
Take your time.
Brett, basically, you look at the returns so far in a place like Anne Arundel County. Steele's getting 53% of the vote there. Ehrlich got 65% 4 years ago, and he only won by 51% of the vote.
That's around Annapolis, right?
That's around, it starts in the southern edge of Baltimore, goes down along the Chesapeake Bay, the western shore of the Chesapeake Bay, down to Annapolis, and past there's some fast-growing suburbs around Crofton and so forth. It's been a pretty Republican area. Steele is not carrying that by a wide margin, and I think looking at some of the other data here, you're seeing Steele carrying Calvert County, where all the vote is in, with 56% of the vote. Ehrlich 4 years ago got 62% in an effort that barely won. That's Calvert County is a fast-growing county immediately south of Anne Arundel on the western shore of the Chesapeake. Let's see what else we've got here. Kent County on the eastern shore of Maryland, a fast-growing area at the eastern terminus, southeastern terminus of the Bay Bridge. Ehrlich got 65%. Steele got 53%. So he's running behind the kind of votes that a Republican needs to win in the statewide race in many of these suburban and fast-growing areas, and he does not seem so far to be running substantially ahead of Ehrlich in Prince George's County as he wished to do, or in Baltimore City, which is the central city of Baltimore, the majority of voters of which are black, as is the case in Prince George's.
And I noticed, by the way, that our popular vote tally has now caught up a little bit and places Cardin a couple of percentage points ahead of Steele. So, Michael, you have convinced me that there was obviously some sound reasons for our decision desk, and that I take it of many other news organizations to declare that Steele had not been the winner there. So thank you for that. Let me make a couple of quick calls here, Michael. In Washington State, Maria Cantwell, she's an incumbent Democrat out there. She'd been in a pretty good race against this guy, Mike McGavick. He gave her a pretty good run, or at least it looked like for a time like he might have a shot. We are calling, however, or estimating, however, that he does not make it, and she wins. This is Chet Edwards, who is a popular Democrat. Chet Edwards, if I'm not mistaken, is the congressman from George Bush's hometown of around Waco, Texas, down there, and he's a kind of a conservative Democrat, very affable guy, very well known to a lot of us in Washington, and we predicted the young man running against him on the right there. The picture doesn't tell you how much younger he seemed, but this is a young man against an older man, and the older man appears has won. Let's check in now with my colleague Major Garrett, our congressional correspondent, for thoughts he has on the House, which he's been observing so closely. Hi, Major.
Hello and good evening, Brett. I just want to sort of take a moment to pause and say, yes, we've expected Democrats to take control of Congress, but we shouldn't underestimate or understate the historic moment that's just occurred. Democrats have been trying to achieve this goal since Republicans won control of the House back in 1994, and they've never done it. As a matter of fact, the net number of seats House Republicans have lost since 1994 is precisely 9. 9 since the entire process of all elections held for the House since 1994. That's all the House of Republicans have lost. Tonight, they've already lost 15. They could lose as many as 30. All right, what's the practical effect for America with Nancy Pelosi as the new Speaker-elect? She's made it clear that though the House Democrats will control the purse strings, House Democrats have no intention of cutting funding immediately for the Iraq War. What they will use, though, is this majority power to try to bring Republicans on board to pressure the White House to achieve a new course in Iraq, moving somewhat toward a planned phased redeployment of forces out of Iraq, possibly to Afghanistan. What about subpoena power? What about investigations? I can tell you this, Britt, Democrats are only going to investigate matters they believe have strong, solid polling bases throughout the country. Real corruption, real misuse of funds, because they believe they have a mandate to do that. One other point. Not only are Republicans losing a lot of House seats, Britt, but those Republicans who are winning are winning with demonstrably lower numbers than they have at any other time since Republicans have controlled the House. They will return to this capital city, I guarantee you. They've already told me, traumatized by this election. Democrats believe they can use that trauma to bring moderate Republicans and those surviving conservative Republicans who may be looking to sort of burnish their credentials about working on a bipartisan basis, quote unquote, getting things done. Democrats are going to try to find those votes, going to try to find that coalition, and that's what they're going to start with come January when the very first female House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, takes the gavel from Dennis Hastert.
Is it clear to you, Major, that all of these conservative Democrats like Heath Shuler and veteran Congressman Gene Taylor down in Mississippi who have chafed a bit under her leadership as minority leader are prepared to vote for her for Speaker?
Yes, I'm absolutely sure of that, Britt. Heath Shuler is a classic example. I knew as a matter of fact when, and I checked on this among Democrats, when Heath Shuler announced in the context of his campaign that he wasn't quite sure if he would vote for Speaker Pelosi if he was elected and Democrats won the majority. I went back and checked. I said, that means you think you've got this seat won. They said, exactly right. We're giving him that pass to tell his voters he's not yet committed. We'll settle all those things after we get the majority, after Heath Shuler wins that race. It's a classic example of running locally and then reassessing yourself after you've won and after your party's won. All those conservative Democrats will vote for Nancy Pelosi because they know she raised the money, she recruited the candidates, and she put together the strategy that won this House majority for the first time in a long, long time. Remember, another skilled politician, Richard Gephardt, tried three times, never made it, and for that he was blamed as a loser in the Democratic ranks, and when he tried to run for president in 2004, it was that loss and that perception as a loser that kept him out of the running as a national candidate. Nancy Pelosi has achieved something enormous for Democrats. They will repay her not only with their votes for her as Speaker, but with their allegiance, at least in the early days of this first Democratic Congress since 1994.
Okay, Major, thanks very much. Let's check down to the White House now for how all this is being received down there and what the president may do in response to it. Our correspondent, Brett Baer. Brett?
Hey, Britt, just talked to White House spokesman Tony Snow. He just left the White House residence, being there with the president, the first lady, and the chief political advisor, Karl Rove. First thing, the president has called a 1 p.m. Eastern Time news conference tomorrow here at the White House. He will address, obviously, all the election issues. Asked Tony Snow about the change from Republican to Democratic control of the House. He said the challenges are the same, and the president believes they have not changed, that Democrats have to continue to help the president to win the war and keep the economy going. He also said, and you wouldn't be surprised to hear this, that the White House thinks there are interesting opportunities here, perhaps even moving forward with comprehensive immigration reform that was stalled in the Republican-controlled House of Representatives. Obviously, this, though, is from a president who spent the last 10 days on the campaign trail stumping the Republican faithful with confidence that they would hold the House and the Senate. There is still hope here at the White House that the Senate can remain Republican. They're looking very closely at this Virginia race. They believe it will not be finished tonight and will likely take perhaps another day or longer before that race is finished. Spokesman Tony Snow saying the president made one phone call tonight, that is to Representative Tom Reynolds of New York, congratulating him on his victory. But likely, he said, Tony Snow said, the president will go to bed tonight with the Senate still hanging in the balance. But again, there is a press conference tomorrow here at the White House, 1 p.m. Eastern. You can see it live here on Fox.
Okay, Brett, we'll be watching. Thanks very much. Let's check in with a couple of further calls now. Pennsylvania 4, this is a seat that's has been held by the Republicans. That's Congresswoman Melissa Hart. It's not an especially hospitable area for Republicans, but she's been able to win there. Not tonight. Another gain for the Democrats. New York 25. This is a hold for the Republicans in a race that I don't think anybody thought was on anybody's particularly long list of seats that were likely to switch, but I'm sure Republicans are glad to have it. Ohio 15, this is a big one because Deborah Price is a member of the leadership, and we're now projecting that she will hang on against her challenger out there. This is a race that someone thought was a goner, and on a night like this, I would have had to say that after all the other results in Ohio that she would probably lose. We project otherwise, that Deborah Price wins. And one other, this is Illinois, Congressional District 8, and that is a hold, I believe, for the Democrats, and thus no switch and no change in the balance of power. Got to take a break now. Be back in just a moment. We can make a call now in that Florida 16th race. That's the Mark Foley seat where you had to punch Foley to get Negron. They may have punched Foley, but not enough. And we now project that the Democratic challenger Mahoney wins over Joe Negron, who was the actual candidate, although Foley's name remained on the ballot. Some people will question the fairness of that, but apparently that's what state law provided. In the meantime, of course, we're still awaiting whether we can make a call. We're up to almost all the votes counted in Virginia. Still too close to call. Most of us do not now think that it's going to be possible to call that race anytime soon. And there's all this interest in the state of Maryland, where the Washington Post, for some reason, has pulled back its call on Ben Cardin the winner. Obviously, this is the kind of thing that lights up the blogosphere. Let's find out if it has from our colleague Michelle Malkin. Michelle?
Hey, Britt. Yeah, the blogosphere is buzzing, very hot over both the Maryland and Virginia races. And for the last hour, actually, some of the blogs, including The Corner at National Review Online, have been stressing the Steele campaign, which is not conceding. In fact, Steele just finished a statement that was run on local stations in Baltimore, telling his people that he is not standing down. I actually communicated myself for my blog, michellemalkin.com, with the Steele campaign about half an hour ago, and they're stressing the absentee ballots. It is a record number of absentee ballots that have been applied for in Maryland, up to 200,000. So it is going to be a long night, and Steele is stealing for that. In Virginia, you'll get a kick out of this, Brett. While the networks are often beaten up for calling things too early, we now have blogs that have called the Allen campaign. A site called The Real World View has gone ahead and called it for Allen. A number of other blogs that have been covering that race have as well. And so they're looking optimistic about that. But again, as Michael Barone and a number of your commenters on your panel have mentioned, it's going to be a long night for that one as well.
Okay, Michelle, very interesting. I like that idea. One thing about if you have a blog, you can do whatever you want. You can call races, you can do whatever you want. Make a call, you can pull it back. You can, I suppose it'd be hard to call a race for somebody when you got 100% in and they've lost, but when you got a blog, what the heck?
Well, I don't understand how anybody can keep track of all the blogs there are there. You have to, there are millions of them. Practically everybody in his pajamas.
It is a real marketplace of ideas. It is an interesting contest because you can get up a blog and make it pretty accessible pretty easily. I mean, all you got to do, if the word gets around and other blogs begin to post a link to your blog, you can develop a following. And the thing is, you have to be interesting.
Real democracy.
Yeah, it's certainly real free speech.
Yes, it is.
One interesting aspect of tonight is you look back and you see Denny Hastert won, right? Deborah Price won. Tom Reynolds, who everybody thought was in danger in New York, won. It looks like, in a way, Republican leadership has managed to hold on, and I don't know how they interact now with Pelosi. What is the new Republican strategy going forward?
Well, actually, I don't think Denny Hastert will stay as leader of the Republicans. I think he will quit from the House now that he's served as Speaker for 8 years.
Quit from the leadership.
I think he may quit from the House, actually. I'm not sure he wants to be a backbencher. He may step down and let there be a special election in Ohio. So there will be an interesting contest for Republican leader in the House, which I think could produce, I'm sorry, in Illinois, right, which could produce fresh blood. One other thing on the Senate race is I just talked to someone who's been in touch with the people in Tennessee. We're not calling it yet, but the Republicans in Tennessee are pretty confident that Corker's going to win. They've looked at what's outstanding, and they think he'll come through, which means Tennessee goes off the map, perhaps. Which means then
you can use your yellow marker for that, and we'll take a look at that.
I mean, we're not calling.
Tennessee comes up. We're down to
Virginia, of course, Missouri, and Montana. If the vote outstanding in Missouri, as we've been told, is primarily a lot of it is St. Louis and Kansas City. Missouri, I think, could be very tough for Republicans. That could go over to the Democrats. That would be 4. A pickup. Montana. Who knows? Tester's been ahead in most of the late polls, but we don't have much vote from there, so that's a question. And then Virginia, of course, we're now at a 5,000 vote lead with about 60,000 votes out.
Wow.
So if they split
so if they split it, what happens? Democrats win, right?
Yeah, if Democrats need Virginia, Montana, and Missouri.
They need 3.
They need all 3.
Split.
If Tennessee holds, all Republicans need, if Tennessee holds, is one of those 3. Montana, I'd say one of those 2, Montana or Virginia, to hold the Senate. Democrats need all 3, Missouri, Montana, Virginia, assuming Tennessee stays Republican.
Wow.
Missouri probably goes, so then it's Montana and Virginia, and the Democrats need to take both of those.
Well, I have to say that we're down to what in Virginia now? 5,000? 3,000 votes?
We are
about a 3,000 vote lead. Is that right?
We are not going to know until there is a recount in Virginia who's going to control the Senate. It amounts to that, you know, because there is going to be a recount.
Unless Burns hangs on in Montana, where we don't have much vote.
Or talent wins.
So there's no way. There's no way, based on the calls that are likely to be made tonight, that we're going to know who has the Senate. Wait a minute. We're going to know whether Democrats, where we can come out of here with a certainty that the Democrats have won the Senate. It's likely to lapse over until either the wee hours of the morning or sometime tomorrow or beyond.
It could. Well, let's see if we get the final vote in Virginia. I mean, if it's a 3, I mean, there will be a recount, but a recount does not usually move more than 500, 800 votes. I mean, I think if someone wins by 3,000 or 4,000 votes in Virginia, it's a pretty clean voting state. I would suspect that would hold up. So it's worth staying tuned, I think, for a few more minutes here, maybe even for an hour, to see where the real final vote in Virginia is.
The Fox News channel is going to be on all into the wee hours of the morning, and before long here, my colleague Shepard Smith will take over. He is young and fresh and attractive and full of energy that I wish I had, and he'll be here to keep it going. And most of the team will be in place as well. So we'll be saying I'll be saying my goodbyes fairly soon. But we're just getting warmed up here, folks. And very little, as you've noticed, escapes our notice here at Fox News. So we'll be staying on. Some thoughts now. If there's anything, I mean. How far do we think this is likely to go in the House in terms of the number? Is this wave blowout, or is this strong midterm showing?
This is well within the historical margins. I mean, assuming that it's 30 or something less than 30, the average for 6th-year-ish elections is 31.5 since World War II.
And what about, has anybody done an average for 6-year wartime? That's worse, I assume.
Yeah.
Well, Mark's done it for 6 years with a president under 50%.
Yeah, and so this is a sort of a standard 6th-year election. There's almost always something going wrong. Either it's Vietnam or it's Watergate or it's a recession or something happens in the 6th year. And this is a sort of a standard election. And the Democrats probably will interpret it as some sort of a mandate. I mean, after all, George Bush didn't win the popular vote in 2000 and took it as a mandate. Rammed through massive tax cuts and changed American foreign policy and all of that. He didn't.
Well, he
stop
didn't do that
him,
until
so.
9/11.
Well, he didn't do it till 9/11, but he certainly did it.
His attitude seemed to be, I may not have won 50% of the vote, but I got 100% of the presidency.
Yes, exactly.
But it was more than that. It was also that he said, "Look, I'm elected. I'm going to do what I said I'd do in my campaign." Britt, here's why it matters whether Republicans lose 20 seats or 30 seats. If it is 30 seats, then that means that Democrats in the House will have a governing working majority, not just a numerical majority. They'll have enough if some of these few conservatives that have won drop off, Nancy Pelosi will still have a majority. It will also mean that there will be a fight for the Republican leadership in the House. Remember what happened in 1998 when Republicans thought they were going to win seats with Speaker Newt Gingrich, and they lost 5 seats? Gingrich was gone. As Speaker, and then he left Congress altogether. So this time there, Mike Pence of Indiana is thinking of running. Steve Shattuck.
You're talking
of
for
Arizona,
leadership.
For the leadership, in this case,
what happens to John Boehner?
Leader.
What happens to John Boehner?
Well, he'll be challenged. No doubt he wants to stay, but if they lose 30 House seats, it may be difficult for him to stay.
And I wouldn't minimize the importance of this. A lot of people...
He's not.
No, Fred isn't. Mort is, I would say. A lot of people had thought that 2004 was the first time in 40 years a president got reelected with a majority of his party winning both houses of Congress, and indeed increasing their vote a little bit in Congress. There was a lot of hope for a permanent governing Republican majority, the Republican realignment that people had worked for so long and hoped for so long.
Well, is that blown up now in your view?
It's stalled out. I mean, you cannot now say, I don't think we can say after this election that it's a majority Republican country. We can say it is an evenly divided country. We're going to have a 50-50 Senate. It looks like, depending on, a couple of thousand votes in Virginia, it might be 51-49. We're going to have a slight, moderate Democratic majority in the House, presumably.
And yet it remains a Democratic governorships. It remains a country with Democrats in positions of real power and authority and in control of at least one House of Congress. But from what we can see from all the polling and everything else, it remains a conservative country.
It remains a moderately conservative country with a Democratic Party that's adjusted to that. A lot of us thought after the Democrats walked away from the Clinton legacy after 2000 that Clinton's attempt to change the Democratic Party had clearly failed. I wonder now whether there's another chance for the Democrats to go in a Clintonian direction. Clinton did win the vote in 92 and 96. You've got a lot of Clinton-type Democrats, I don't mean in terms of their personal life, but in terms of their moderate politics, being elected to the House this year, and even a few to the Senate.
But I would have got to agree with you. If you look back at 2004, you would have thought we were on the verge of establishing that Republican majority. That has not happened. And what you have now is an opportunity, I think, for the Democrats to assert themselves in a way that I think is going to leave President Bush injured for his last years. I don't know that he can get anything done.
All right, this has been great insights from all of you tonight. Thank you very much. I know many of you will remain here as we keep on through the night. I want to turn now, though, back to Washington and our chief political correspondent, Carl Cameron, for some final thoughts from him, at least on this phase of our programming. Carl?
Hi, Britt. 5 months ago, we headed out on the campaign trail. We went to 20 states and countless congressional districts. From the very beginning, we said it was going to end up being a toss-up, and it's a purple country, and it looks like we're going to actually see recounts now. That seems to be almost a standard operating procedure now for American elections. It looks as though we're going to have the first female Speaker of the House in history, Nancy Pelosi, a liberal from San Francisco, elected largely by the victories of conservative Democrats. And in the Senate, we still don't know what's going to happen, and we do know that an awful lot of those members of the U.S. Senate are going to be out on the campaign trail 3 days from now for presidential races. Brett.
All right, Carl, thanks very much. We're going to turn quickly to your colleague, Major Garrett, who is there and has been following these House races these many weeks. Major, your final thoughts here.
3 quick points, Britt. First of all, point 1, what's the grand prize for House Democrats? The grand prize for House Democrats is Iraq. Democrat strategists tell me Democrats simply must be part of the solution, not propagating, continuing the problem if they're going to hold a majority. Point 2, they won in suburban districts after Republican-orchestrated gerrymandering, which means they have a chance to hold suburban districts for the long haul. To do that, they have to produce on health care, keep taxes low, balance the budget, things Democrats have said they would be willing to do, but have never been proven to be able to do. Those are the 2 big issues. Suburban issues, finding a solution for Iraq. If they do that, Democrats believe they'll hold not just this cycle, but many more to come.
All right, Major, thanks very much. Thanks for all your insights tonight. Final thoughts now from my colleague, Michael Barone, down at our decision desk. Michael?
Well, Bill Clinton in the 90s tried to form a Democratic majority and failed. George Bush has tried to form a Republican majority in this thing and is, if not failed, encountered a big stumbling block. Democrats now have an opportunity to advance some ideas. They haven't done very much of that in this campaign, and neither have Republicans. And Republicans will have an idea. The Democrats in the House, the roughly evenly divided Senate, and presidential candidates of both parties in 2008.
Ron, thanks very much. And last but by certainly not least, my colleague Chris Wallace. Chris, first of all, thanks for handling so much of the interviews for us tonight, and thanks for your insights on the exit polls. Your final thoughts.
You know, Britt, I think that when people look back at this election, they're going to call it the Iraq midterm. I think that there was an awful lot of dissatisfaction. You could see it in the exit polls with the situation and the war in Iraq, as Bill Kristol has rightly pointed out, not all from Democrats, not all from the liberal, from the left side, also from conservatives who are not happy with the continuing situation in Iraq. The other point I think I would make is the Mark Foley scandal. If you look at all the graph, the chart of the generic polls, there was a big spike in late September when this Foley scandal broke. I think it fit into the whole issue of the culture of corruption, and that's really when you saw the Democratic advantage and the generic ballot spike. So Iraq and corruption created an awful lot of headwind for a lot of these Republican candidates to have to deal with.
And as we've seen, they were unable to do it, at least in the House, and may prove unable to do it in the Senate. That, of course, is where all the late-night suspense is. And we're still, Chris, thanks very much, keeping an eye on 4 particular races. We're watching, and we can show you the boards such as we have them on those. We're looking at the race in Missouri. Jim Talent clinging to a lead with now 57% of the vote in, but as you can see, it's a 64,000 vote lead. Big cities can turn that around in no time. And we heard that Kansas City and St. Louis are still out, so who knows what that means in terms of the lead. John Tester ahead of Conrad Burns, now only 18% in Montana. We won't know much more about that for a long time. Tennessee is one where Republicans, at least, are privately very optimistic that they have won that. We are not prepared to call it, even though there's 88% of the vote in. And the Republicans will need more than that. They will also need Virginia to win. And this race has now, Webb has now pulled ahead by a little less than 3,000 votes with 99% counted. We're headed for a recount in Virginia. We may not know the final outcome of that for some time. This concludes my portion of this broadcast, but my colleague, the very able Shepard Smith, will be here in just a minute to take charge. So thanks for watching, and thanks to all of our Fox News team for our coverage tonight. Good night from me.
2006 Election Night. Live from Fox News Election Headquarters in New York, Shepard Smith.
And good evening from New York City, where it's just past midnight on the East Coast, just past 9 p.m. on the West Coast, and do we have a horse race ahead for you? The balance of power in the United States Senate is yet to be decided. 3 weeks ago, had anyone told you that the Democrats would have a shot at this late hour of taking over the United States Senate, you might have looked them in the face and called them a liar. And tonight, there is change afoot. The question is, can it happen? Will Republicans regain control, or will Democrats take over? We'll be going through that with the latest numbers as we get them, and with our panel tonight, beginning here in New York with me, Rich Lowry, the editor of the National Review and a Fox News contributor, Kirsten Powers, a Democratic strategist and a Fox News contributor, Michael O'Hanlon, senior fellow at the Brookings Institution and author of the new book on your newsstands now, Hard Power, The New Politics of National Security, and our own Bill Kristol, the editor of the Weekly Standard. And let's start with Bill, because he's been talking throughout the night about exactly what's already moved over and what must move over for there to be a change in the Senate. Bill, it looks like we're down to 4 states for the Dems to get 3.
We're down to 4 states, Shep, as you correctly say. We can go to this little board here. Montana, Missouri, let me just do this thing correctly. Montana, Missouri, Virginia, and Tennessee. This is assuming Maryland was correctly called for the Democrats.
And we're sticking with that call.
We're sticking with that call, and I think that's probably right. If that is correct, we then have Tennessee, which looks Republican. We're not calling it officially, but I've spoken to someone who follows Tennessee very closely, who's gone through what's left outstanding, what counties have not come in yet. He's pretty confident, quite confident, Tennessee stays Republican. If that is the case, Tennessee goes off the board, and then the Democrats need 3 of 3.
They have to run the table.
They have to run the table. Missouri, Republicans privately are very worried about. A huge amount of the vote outstanding is from St. Louis and Kansas City. They think that McCaskill will probably beat Talent, but we're not calling that, and we should see how the popular vote goes. Montana, we don't have much vote. Tester's ahead. He's been ahead in most of the polls. That one could go Democratic, in which case we're at Virginia. Virginia is right now, with 1% of the vote out. Webb has about a 2,500 vote lead, with about 20,000 votes still to be counted, presumably. It looks like that late vote was inner city African American vote, strongly Democratic, trending for Webb. I think Webb will go into the recount, if I had to predict right now, with the lead. And I guess if one had to predict right now, therefore, we could have an extremely tenuous Democratic majority in the Senate, depending on whether Webb's lead, 2,500 vote, 3,000 vote lead holds up in a recount. But we don't know Montana yet. We don't know Missouri yet. So I'm getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, I guess.
We are getting ahead, but the truth of the matter is there are rules in place in the state of in the state of Virginia, which would apply to all of this. Our legal analysts are on it. Megan Kendall is here, and so is Judge Andrew Napolitano, and we'll talk about the legal issues that are ahead. You may have heard there are 10,000 lawyers on standby across this nation. I bet a lot of people are taking flights right now to the greater Washington, D.C. area. Put on your seatbelt. This is far from over. So we'll get to Michael Barone in just a moment, too. Let's start with Rich Lowry. Rich, first, though, I want to make another call in the state of Arizona, another pickup for the Democrats as we go to the National Balance of Power Board. And here it is, Mitchell, the winner over Hayworth. J.D. Hayworth, a Fox News contributor, I believe, widely believed to have won. Rich, I believe, had a double-digit lead within the past month, in some polling at least, and now that seat is lost. That's another Democratic pickup.
Well, Shep, this is a race that came on late in the cycle, and you're going to see probably tonight a good number of these sort of Republicans washed away who were not expecting a tough race. The races came online at the end, and they weren't prepared. And with Hayworth, I love J.D. I've seen him in the green room here, as everyone who had comments on Fox has.
And so that I'm clear about this, he's not a contributor, but a frequent guest here. At any rate, go ahead.
But the problem he had a reputation for talking more than listening out in that district. Most years, he probably gets by, and a year like this, he doesn't. So, Shep, we're probably looking at at least a Democratic game in the mid-20s in the House, and it could go higher. And Hayworth is a sign that it's going higher.
I spoke to 2 Democrats tonight who said privately they would not be surprised, they're not anticipating, but they wouldn't be surprised to pick up 40 seats in the United States House of Representatives. That's a number that only the Los Angeles Times in its reporting and prognosticating suggested, and when it did make that suggestion, the entire nation, well, much of the nation laughed at
Well, I
it.
believe also Stu Rothenberg has been 30, mid-30s, up to 40. I mean, 40 would be a big number.
I predicted 40 Friday night, I would like
Bill
to say.
Kristol,
but I don't think, right now, I would say more likely mid-30s, but 40, but you know, it's a pretty big gain.
What happened?
Well, look, obviously the war was unpopular, and there's no unobtrusive way to be losing a war, and we're basically losing a war in Iraq, and the public's not happy with it for understandable reasons. Then you had a Republican majority that didn't produce over the last 2 years.
Legislative
and
agenda.
was beset with a lot of ethical scandals and issues. And Shep, all during this election year, I've talked to Republican strategists and insiders, and they'll say, you know what, Republicans really don't deserve to win this year, but Democrats deserve it even less. The public, unfortunately for Republicans, only agreed with the first part of that statement.
Kirsten?
Well, I think that it is part of it's the war, but it's not just that the war is going badly. It's that I don't think people are happy about the way the Republicans have talked about the war, and I don't think that they think that the administration has particularly acknowledged some of the problems that are going on there. And let's face it, these Republicans that are running out there aren't exactly innocent bystanders. They were there along the way every single time a vote came up about the war, saying, yes, Mr. President, everything is going exactly the way it should be going, and we're not going to criticize you. And I think a lot of these votes are really people, especially when you see independents that are voting, even in Republican districts for Democrats, are basically saying, we want some oversight, we want some debate on this. We want to win the war, but we don't feel like this is really there isn't a real bipartisan exchange going on here, and I think that what we're going to see now is some real bipartisanship.
Was Elizabeth Dole saying that the Democrats don't want to win this war? Was that along the lines of the kinds of things that you believe may have gone wrong?
No, look, I think there's something.
You don't believe that, do you?
I think there's something to what Kirsten says. I think people have the sense that George Bush doesn't listen. And that's always a deadly sense for any leader and for any politician. Now, the reason for that, he says he believes it's his role to be out there, to always look strong, to always look confident, to always look resolute, and there's something to be said for that. But the American public thinks it has read it as kind of a stubbornness and an unwillingness to listen. And I think people like Elizabeth Dole, who say the Democrats don't want to win, I don't know whether that's true, but it is true, I think, that a lot of Democrats are not willing to, or have no really good ideas about how we win in Iraq. And what they've primarily done is carp and criticize and hope this war brings down the president. And that's been a winning political strategy. I don't think it's a particularly admirable one.
We're going to talk about exactly how to move this ball forward. Have you heard a suggestion from the Democrats, from a one-voice Democratic Party, of how to win this war? Have you heard what the next strategy is going to be? Have you had them come together now and give you not just problems? We know what the problems are. We've identified them very clearly during the course of this election. The problems to the American people seem quite clearly to be border control and illegal immigration, and the war, specifically the war in Iraq, which most Americans seem to separate from the war on terror. That said, what are the solutions? We're going to be looking for those tonight. Michael O'Hanlon, the book is Hard Power, The New Politics of National Security. Is there a chapter on the landslide victory of the Democrats in the House of Representatives in '06?
Well, there is a chapter on what to do about Iraq, but we don't claim any silver bullet. And that's the sort of language that Secretary of State Baker also is cautioning we better be prepared for when he issues his report. In other words, we're in a bad shape in Iraq. And I think the message from this election is let's at least agree on that. There is not a mandate for withdrawal. There is not a mandate to give up. Some parts of the Democratic Party may want that. Not even the majority of Democrats want that. But there is a mandate to at least stop the nonsense that we've been hearing sometimes from the administration, that we should be pleased with how things are going, that absolutely we're winning, that kind of rhetoric that even the president has sometimes been vulnerable to participating in the last few weeks. After a year in which I think he's been generally more on message, a more sober tone. But the last few weeks in the election, he started saying things that really are hard to sustain with the realities on the ground. I think Americans want to begin from that basic diagnosis. Now, as you say, do Democrats have better ideas? Collectively, certainly not. Individually, there are some ideas out there. There are a number in our book. One of them certainly is the idea of trying to invigorate the economy in Iraq by trying to get people working. This is only a partial answer. It's not the core of the security problem, but it's one notion. Another one is to go with Leslie Gelb and Joe Biden's idea of a soft partitioning of Iraq. How do you do that? That's three autonomous zones, sharing oil equally, but otherwise largely governing themselves and policing themselves, so that you get away from some of this militia violence. But there's a lot more work that has to be done to flesh out that idea.
Is there a plan? Is there a solution? Does anyone have one? And is this Democratic House of Representatives the House of Representatives of the far left of the Republican Party, or of the centrists who've been running all along? Do you think the ones who've been around for a while are going to take a back seat and move this thing to the center? We'll talk about that coming up in just a moment. And if you're a Republican who's still looking for something to hang on to, it's this. The United States Senate may still be yours. If you're a Democrat looking for more celebrating, look no farther than the state of Virginia, where right now it's as close can be, within 2,500 or 3,000 votes. There are just a few more to count. We should know shortly what you've decided 2006. Our election coverage continues 13 minutes past 9 o'clock on the West Coast. Answers are coming, and you decide. Well, you've decided. We just don't know what yet. Let's look right at Virginia. 100% of the precincts are now counted. All of the votes are tallied. And the separation there, I am told, less than 1/10 of 1%. And you can see the numbers on your screen. It's less than 3,000 votes. What happens next? Recount. Do you think lawyers get involved? You can bet on it. We now know that President Bush is going to be speaking tomorrow. The schedule is out, and our chief White House correspondent, Brett Baer, is live at the White House with that. Brett, what do you know?
Hey, Shep. White House spokesman Tony Snow says the president will hold a 1 p.m. Eastern Time news conference tomorrow, and we're likely to hear a much different President Bush than we heard on the campaign trail over the past 10 days, which he stumped in about 15 different cities. Tony Snow saying tonight that the president was clearly disappointed that the House changed over to Democrats. He predicted along the campaign trail that the Republicans would hold that. However, he said the challenges still remain the same, and they will not change tomorrow morning. The president will continue to call on Democrats to help him win the war and to keep the economy going, but clearly it's going to be a different sound out of this White House. There is still a hope here about holding control in the Senate. They're holding firm to looking at that Virginia race that will not be decided tonight. They're also looking at Missouri and Tennessee very closely, and Montana they're watching as well. So there's still hope that the Republicans could hold on to the Senate here at the White House. Spokesman Tony Snow also saying that the White House was encouraged by what they heard from top Democrats today, that essentially Democrats would not stop funding for the war in Iraq, would not do anything radical like that, but clearly are going to be pushing for a change in policy. It's going to be interesting to see the president address all of these issues since he was really the focus of this campaign as he stumped around the country in very red states to try to gin up the Republican base over the past 10 days. Joe?
And we'll look at the specific numbers of the specific places where he campaigned, and the results may be surprising. We'll get that in a minute. Hey, it seemed like only President Bush and Karl Rove seemed unsure about this. They seemed very confident, or said they were publicly at least. Privately, is there surprise there tonight, or privately were they expecting this?
Privately, they knew it was going to be an uphill battle today, looking at the polls going in to hold on to the House. I think there is some surprise that the Senate is as close as it is right now and is really hanging on a razor's edge. The question will be how big the House majority is for the Democrats before the night is done, and really what kind of change we'll hear from the president tomorrow at this news conference. You know, he spent the last 10 days really ripping into Democrats, sometimes saying that if the Democrats win, America loses in the war on terror. So you're going to have to see a president that's very much more conciliatory to be able to work with House Democrats starting tomorrow.
Brett Baer live at the White House. Brett, good of you. Rich Lowry, is there a way to be more conciliatory? Is there someone who can work across party lines?
Yeah, well, I think he's
going
to have to look for a new departure in his Iraq policy, and I think a key element of that has to be, in some sense, to be more aggressive and send more troops there. But it's going to have to be coupled with some sort of outreach to Democrats. President Bush is going to have to say in some form or another, as any president would after an election like this, I have heard the message of the American people, and I'm going to respond to it. And I think with regard to Iraq, his administration needs a new look. I don't think Vice President Cheney or Secretary of Defense Don Rumsfeld have a lot of credibility when they're out defending the war.
Are you saying that Rumsfeld and Cheney should go, Rich?
No, I'm not saying Cheney should go.
Are you saying
I think
Rumsfeld
you should
go?
look at the Pentagon and at least have a new Iraq czar or someone else. Probably.
Rumsfeld should probably go, said the editor of the National Review. It was President Bush who said...
You had to drag that out of
It was President Bush who, in the waning hours of this contest, just 2 days ago, amid a firestorm of controversy, stepped to the microphones and said, "He's my man through the end of this administration." Does that change? I'll ask for that answer when we come back. In addition, who's the statesman? Who steps up for the Democrats and for the Republicans, gets together on Capitol Hill and says, let's stop talking about things about which no one cares. Let's come up with some solutions to the things that the American public have said are problems. The war on terror and the war in Iraq. What do you do differently? Immigration and border control. Is a 700-mile fence the answer? Is there funding for a 700-mile fence? Is anyone taking it seriously? Were they afraid to before the election, but might not be now? We'll also get to Michael Barone down in the decision room where they're working to decide what you've decided in the state of Virginia. The United States Senate clearly rests on the backs of people in that very state. What next? Stay tuned. Waiting for decisions across the nation, one of the biggest of them all is in the state of Virginia. Every vote is counted, and it's extremely close, too close to call. A recount is coming. Michael Barone is the man who keeps track of the district by district. Michael, what happened in Virginia and what's ahead?
Well, what happened in Virginia is that George Allen, who started off this race thinking about running for president, is now ending up the race thinking about a recount, Shep. You know, he made several mistakes along the way. Some people think he employed a flawed strategy. Northern Virginia
didn't help.
Northern Virginia, up around inside the Beltway, around D.C. area, has become a heavily Democratic area during the Bush years. So, you know, put it all together. Virginia is an undecided race. Taking a look at the state website, Shep, the last precincts that need to be counted still, you've got 4 in the 3rd congressional district.
Oh, there are some to be counted because our graphic says 100%.
Well, I've got, according to the state, I've got a couple more. Now, that may be down there. Virginia tries to count absentees with the precinct count. It's not a separate absentee count, but it usually doesn't net quite all of the absentees. It may get 90 or 95% of them. There's no extended deadline for military ballots. They have to be in by November 7th. So there's not much room for change, but remember, both parties, and particularly the Republicans, have been putting on an absentee ballot drive, so there may be some, in that small residuum of absentee ballots that have not yet been counted, there may be some to move this result a little bit in one direction or another. But this is a very close race, and interestingly, quite a few of about 20 of the black precincts, or precincts in the black majority 3rd congressional district, reported late in the game. And
which is the reason for that late tightening.
Yeah, and that's the reason why Jim Webb was making up and making up votes, and not making them up in the sense of creating them out of whole cloth, but was rather eliminating or narrowing what had been a plurality for George Allen to the point where it becomes a plurality for Jim Webb.
Yep, sounds like that's going to be a recount for sure. Bill Kristol, if we leave that sort of in flux, that means, what's Tennessee looking like? Tennessee, Bob Corker and Harold Ford Jr., it's been close, but it looks like there's separation.
Yeah, AP has called Tennessee for Corker. Our decision desk, which is cautious, says they're right on the cusp. They're not quite ready to do it. But I personally am going to say that Republicans are going to win Tennessee, and that one is going to go off the board, which means the Democrats then need to win Virginia, Montana, and Missouri.
All right, but let's start with Missouri. Missouri is very, very close. I've seen you making phone calls. What are you hearing?
What I'm hearing is that the Republicans in Missouri fear that most of the outstanding vote, much of the outstanding vote, is from St. Louis and Kansas City, from Democratic precincts, mostly inner city, and they think McCaskill pulls out Missouri. No one's called it yet. To my knowledge, we certainly haven't. If Missouri goes Democratic, let me do this here if I can do this well.
Missouri moves over.
Missouri moves over. Virginia is now, I guess you'd have to say, slightly Democratic, just at the edge there. You're
That's
right,
brilliant.
because it's
2,500 votes.
2,400 votes. It's
Yeah.
1/10%. There's about 2.3 million votes been cast in Virginia. 2,400 vote margin.
And Montana?
Then Montana, Tester is ahead. He's been ahead in most of the polls.
That's the Democrat.
No one's calling it yet. Tester is the Democrat against the incumbent Conrad Burns. Most people I've talked to tonight seem to think there aren't as many experts on Montana politics as there are in Virginia and Tennessee and Missouri. But those who have followed a little bit in Montana,
Great
say
Falls, hello.
It's close. It's close, though. That one we need to see the real vote. Most people would say I think that Tester's likely to win it. But that one could also be very close.
Sounds to me like you think what we're told. Well, there's Tester and Conrad Burns, and there's some degree of separation there, but that means nothing. 28% of them are in, and we don't know where they're from. Great Falls, where's Great Falls? Where's Billings? Those will be telling.
I do think, if you had to predict right now, you would probably say that the Democrats will pick up Missouri and probably Montana, though we only have seen 28% of the vote, and then they would win the Senate if Webb's 2,400 vote margin in Virginia holds up in a recount. 2,400 votes isn't nothing. I mean, I think in most very few recounts in American history have turned over that many votes.
800's a high side.
Right,
unless there's
there are big
weirdness.
irregularities. So I suppose right now the odds are slightly better than 50-50 that the Democrats win the Senate, but I'd sure like to see a lot more vote from Montana.
Here's my
before
guess.
saying this.
Virginia is changing from Virginia is for lovers to Virginia is for lawyers. You watch. Hey, I think down there Juan Williams is watching all this for us. Juan Williams, senior reporter for National Public Radio and a Fox News contributor. Juan, I heard the predictions that you sounded confident that the Democrats would do something, but this many and this early?
No, I didn't. I got to tell you, I didn't think that it would come so easily. And when I say that, what I mean is, if you look back just to when the president won the second term, I thought that that was possible that with the normal 60-year dip that there was going to be some gains for the Democrats, but I did not think it would be sufficient that they would challenge for the Senate. I didn't think it would get anywhere close to that. I thought it was possible that they would get the 15 and come close to the House, but what we're looking at tonight is much more than 15. Even with some of those districts in Georgia still to come, possibly remaining in Republican hands, we're looking at really a strong effort on the part of Democrats in what looked like at one time was going to be a strong Republican permanent majority, which is what Karl Rove had been building towards. And when it comes to Iraq, Shep, the changes I think you're going to see, the Democrats have to exercise a stronger brand of leadership. Previously, there was no established Democratic leader to be called on. I think now Pelosi's in place. I think even in the Senate, you're going to see Harry Reid, who's going to be potentially the Senate Majority Leader if what Bill Kristol says is right. And so Harry Reid is going to have to come up with a plan that he's going to have to be able to take to the American people, take to President Bush, and say this can work. The most workable plan that the Democrats have out there is one that is put forward by Joe Biden, the senator from Delaware, who calls for some kind of partition, possibly establishing U.S. troops at the border. And then, of course, there's more talk about putting more American troops in Iraq and fighting the terrorists there. So there are all sorts of ideas out there, but now that the Democrats have done sufficiently well in these midterms, it's incumbent on them to exercise real leadership. Okay, you won, now what are you going to do? It's one of those deals, and they might celebrate tonight, but tomorrow morning they're going to have to come to terms, and I think the American people are going to have high expectations for what their ideas are going to be.
Juan Williams, thanks. This is a Fox News alert. Fox News now projects the state of Tennessee goes to the Republican, Bob Corker. Bob Corker, the former mayor of the city of Chattanooga, a businessman, a man who had largely at least split the Republican Party during the primary, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. Bob Corker, Fox News projects the new United States Senator from the state of Tennessee. This is Bill Frist's seat, which was vacated. Bill Frist said he would be out, and he was. And at least at the current projections, with 94% of the vote in, Corker leading forward by about 50,000. Now, Bob Corker is a man who divided the party during the primary season, and from right and business, it almost seemed like. And it was bloody. It was bloody, Bill Kristol, and it was bloody along the way in the primary season.
It was, my experience has been party leaders, party operatives hate primaries. They're always trying to clear the field. Let's have an uncontested primary. I remember in '98, the Republicans were so proud that they cleared the field in California for Dan Lundgren to run for governor. The Democrats had an incredibly bitter race. The Democrats won the gubernatorial general election by 20 points. Chuck Schumer won a very bitter race in the New York primary in 1998. D'Amato, of course,
in 98,
hosted to renomination in the primary. Schumer clobbered D'Amato. I've always thought that running a tough primary does not hurt a candidate. It often helps him.
And also,
look what Corker did.
Improved during this race. There was a month or so out from the election where there was real panic among Republicans about this race because Harold Ford is such a fantastic candidate. And Corker, he brought some new people in and really ran a fantastic campaign. And most years you'd say
the same candidate.
Well, that's more or less true. Most years you'd say a Republican winning in Tennessee, no big deal. But this year it is a big deal. And one of the ironies of this night is that you had, I think, the two best Senate candidates losing. Michael Steele looks like he's going to lose in Maryland, and now Harold Ford, who both ran great campaigns and are incredibly winsome candidates.
Now, I promised I was going to ask, who's the statesman? Who's the one who's going to come up and try to shake hands? Who's the Tip O'Neill with a glass of scotch? I mean, who is it? Who's going to try to get something done instead of squabbling up there on Capitol Hill all the time? Have the people spoken or what? Can you get your stuff together and fix some of the problems? Well, we'll get to Kirsten Powers about that in just a moment. Tennessee's off the table. That goes Republican. Now it's down to 3 states. 3 states, including Virginia. And as goes Virginia, probably so goes your Senate. We'll get into that horse race coming up in just a moment and analyze the problems that were brought forward, and does anyone have a solution? As You Decide 2006 coverage continues on Fox News Channel in just a moment.
Entertainment.
Well, you've decided. We just don't know the decision yet, especially in Virginia. 3 states left. The Republicans, well, the Democrats need to run the table, or the Republicans need to grab one, or the United States Senate goes over to the Democrats. We'll get that in just a moment. But now the Democrats clearly control the House of Representatives. They can help control some of the language, and hopefully they can find someone who can work across the aisle and get something done. Kirsten Powers is a Democratic strategist and a Fox News contributor. Who's the statesman or stateswoman to say, we can work together?
Well, I mean, for all the vilification that's happened of Nancy Pelosi, I think she actually is a pretty good politician, and I think she can work pretty well with other people.
Who can have any office she wants.
Look, people say things in the lead up to elections that maybe aren't as
maybe
advised as they should be. But the point is, look, when it comes to what the House can do in terms of the war, they can basically do 3 things. They can declare war, they can provide oversight for war, and they can provide the funding for the war. Now, there's been a lot of talk about will they withdraw the funding. I certainly hope that that's not the case, and it's not going to be something certainly that's going to come out of the box. But they can provide some oversight, and I think that they will have to start to work with the administration. But it's sort of silly, actually, in my opinion, for people to keep saying that somehow the House is going to come up with a war plan. The House doesn't come up with a war plan. The president comes up with a war plan.
Maybe the House could provide a roadmap toward let's get something done.
That's right, and I think, but Shep, you just hit on exactly what hasn't been going on. That hasn't been happening with the Republicans and the president. They have really just been saying whatever the president says is the way to go. And what you need to be having is more of a real back and forth, and people questioning the president and saying, look, we don't really feel like what you're doing is the right direction. Let's work together. But it's up to the Pentagon and the president to come up with the plan.
Well, somebody's going to have to come up with a way for everybody to start working together in some way.
Well,
I think that's part of the message here,
And I do think that if we, yes, and I also think if we end up with the Senate, then we'll be in a better position for some statesman-like behavior.
Michael O'Hanlon has thoughts on this, but first George Allen is speaking. He's just thanked his family for all the help that he's been given, and George Allen, part of a previously almost unthinkable night, certainly a couple of weeks ago. Nobody predicted this many, at least this no one up high. Let's listen to George Allen for just a moment.
The rights of people are enshrined and protected in our Constitution. We are a representative democracy. This has been an interesting election, and the election continues. As Senator Warner said, good morning, Patriots. And all of us have worked very hard, and all of you all who are still here tonight have worked so hard with a tremendous amount of dedication, efforts, devotion, and prayers to this campaign. I also thank the great efforts of my campaign staff who are around here somewhere. I see some of you all here. And all the other volunteers who've come in and worked in this campaign. You've heard me say, as John Warner and I and others were barnstorming around the Commonwealth, the world is controlled by those who show up. And we were talking about how important it was to get every vote in. Oh, wherever our Attorney General is, if he's up, where is he? He's in the back. He went through one of these last year. So the point of the matter is, John's gone through a similar situation. In fact, the first time I ever won an election, I won by, on election night, it was 18 votes. We had to have a recount. So the point of the matter is, we're still counting votes. It seems like every time there's a new email, you know, there's some more votes coming in. There's absentee precincts. There are some counties that say that, well, they'll get to counting the ballots later on today. In other words, they've gone home and they'll come back to work tomorrow and count those precincts. So the point of the matter is, I've been through it. I think that the counting, I know the counting will continue through the night. It'll continue tomorrow. And I want to thank you all, because I know you're going to be like a bunch of eagles and hawks watching how every one of these votes are accurately counted. And I thank you for your participation.
So George Allen is speaking, and the results are not yet in. We know that 100% of the votes are counted according to our count. And the lead is for his opponent, the Democrat, by 2,500. Now get this. The Allen campaign has just contacted Fox News. And the Allen campaign says the networks have transposed raw vote totals for the race, that Allen is, in fact, up 5,000 to 6,000 votes. Now, I don't know about you, but that begins to give me a headache, one that sounds very familiar. We're going to hear a lot over the next few days. Carl Cameron is the one who got this information for us. Carl, what's this based on? Do you know?
Well, the Allen campaign has been watching this incredibly closely, and to just give you an idea of how sometimes even the slightest sort of infinitesimal piece of rhetorical flourish can get you in trouble, they're going to argue, the Allen campaign, that it's not 100% of the votes in. Commonwealth of Virginia says it's actually somewhere in the neighborhood of 99.6%, so there's still some votes out there that are uncounted. You heard Senator Allen talk about how the absentee ballots are not yet counted. Loudoun County, one of the bigger counties, a fairly conservative county where George Allen might do well, the registrar, we're told, decided to close up shop tonight without counting all the votes. They're going to have to go back and do some counting tomorrow. Not a recount. This is the original count that's going to spill into tomorrow because it got so late. So lots of material for the Allen campaign and for Republicans to point to suggest that it's not going to be over tonight. Mr. Allen's no stranger to recounts, and it's been pretty clear. The statute in Virginia says that if the race is within 1 percentage point, after the results have been certified as within 1 percentage point, then the loser can call for, or the second place, the runner-up, can call for a recount, and then it'll go forward.
Yeah, but Carl, I thought you said that he's claiming there was the numbers were transposed. I mean, how many different explanations are there here, Lucy?
Not too many, and the truth of the matter is the polls are closed, so a glitch on the screen isn't like it's going to change certain votes being cast. It's not like they can claim that, oh, well, you're tainting the outcome over on the West Coast where the time zones and the polls haven't closed yet, which they now have. The truth of the matter is it's just complaining. But at this point, any close race, and candidates in both parties are going to look for anything, and if they have to blame it on the media, if they have to blame it on each other, if they have to blame it on the alignment of the stars, they're gonna count the Allen campaign in for a recount if they have to. And
yeah, it's 1/10 of 1%. They're gonna get it.
Oh, absolutely. And there was some speculation earlier tonight that Allen was going to come down tonight, and rather than just rally the folks in the room and say, hey, hang in there and thanks very much, he was going to claim victory. Yep. In order to sort of stake out some territory against Mr. Webb. I suspect we're going to hear Mr. Webb fairly soon from now saying essentially the same thing that George Allen did.
I suspect we will too, and I wonder about the legal challenges in all this. Judge Andrew Napolitano is our chief judicial analyst, former justice of the New Jersey Superior Court, and live with us now. Judge Napolitano will be with us in just a moment to talk about what the possibilities are here, legally speaking. Before you get to the legalities of it all, you have to have a recount. And of course, if we're over here transposing numbers, well, I'd blame the media first. It's a trend that I've seen work along the way. Michael O'Hanlon, as we begin to dissect what happened and how to go forward here, certainly people are going to have to come up with some sort of strategy regarding this war.
Absolutely. You were asking before about statesmen, stateswomen. Two people I'll look for would be whether Jane Harman winds up having a chance to chair the Intelligence Committee. And we know that she and Nancy Pelosi don't necessarily have the best relationship.
I wonder if that wouldn't even be a sign. You know, this is a woman who's worked across the lines very well, who many are suggesting, if she is not allowed to stay in that position, might let us know exactly how difficult this fight is going to be.
He'll tell us something, and so will Steny Hoyer, the #2 among House Democrats. Will he hold that position, or will Jack Murtha, who we all know has a distinguished career but has become very controversial in wanting immediate withdrawal or very near-term withdrawal of U.S. troops from Iraq. Will he challenge Murtha and be successful? Those are two very big questions in terms of determining how the Democrats in the House take on the Iraq issue.
I remember distinctly, because I got evil email about it from one of my bosses, sitting next to you in Studio B one afternoon, and you said, right after this election is over, mark my words, right after this election is over, they're going to make changes. Are they going to make changes, Bill Kristol?
They being president?
The president.
I think Donald Rumsfeld will step down as Secretary of
Will
Defense.
step down without being asked to, and that's how he gets around his statement of 3 days ago.
I believe that will happen. And in terms of the Democrats in the House and the Senate, I would point to two additional people. Rahm Emanuel, who will get a lot of credit for this Democratic majority, which looks like it'll be in the 15 to 20 seat range now, probably a 30 to 35 seat pickup. He is a worked in the Clinton White House. He's a Clinton Democrat. He's been pretty quiet on the war. He's not a foreign policy expert, but he's not going to want, I think, to go in an extremely dovish direction. I think he will strengthen the Steny Hoyer, let's call it, faction in the House Democrats. And Joe Lieberman. If the Democrats have 51 seats, who provides their majority? Joe Lieberman. And I think Lieberman and other moderate Democrats, there are about 5, 6, 7 of them, Blanche Lincoln of Arkansas, Democrats from Louisiana and other states, become very, very important. Lieberman in particular could really play an incredibly important role over the next 2 years.
There is an incredibly important race still out there. We are down to 3 states. The Republicans need to keep them, well, the Democrats need to get them all. The Republicans need to keep one: Virginia, Missouri, and Montana. It's not over yet. Quarter to 1 on the East Coast, quarter to 10 on the West Coast, and there is an accusation now from the Allen campaign in the state of outside Washington. It's called Virginia. Yes, it's late. In the state of Virginia, and he says, well, the networks have transposed. One of the reasons is the networks have transposed the numbers. Well, we've gone back and checked, and our crack staff here has added it all up again. With 99.26% of all votes counted, the separation in votes is 1,726. That means recount. And if recount doesn't go the way each candidate likes it, and it won't, only one will like the recount, then the lawyers. We'll get to Judge Andrew Napolitano on that in just a moment. Bill Kristol, we're down to 1 state, it feels like, doesn't it?
Well, we don't know about Montana or Missouri.
I said it feels like.
Feels like. And I think Montana, some of the guys, some of the political scientists in our decision desk think one of them, they seem to be slightly split. Just looking ahead, one of them thinks Tester wins in Montana, the other one thinks it might be very, very close. The polls had Tester ahead, and Tester is ahead in the raw vote now. So let's see what happens in Montana. God, it's really unbelievable if we come down to a recount for a Senate seat, which determines the majority in the Senate.
If Don Rumsfeld steps down, who steps up?
That's a great question.
Like, no one's thought of this. They've thought of this.
One of the arguments that's been made on Rumsfeld's behalf by his conservative defenders is who is the alternative, especially if you're assuming a fairly toxic confirmation environment. So I don't have any great ideas off the top of my head.
You know, and you can make the argument, I think, Kirsten and Michael, I think you could make the argument that the problem, according to the American people here, is what's happening, not who's punching the buttons. I mean, if you put another figurehead in there, you still need, people have spoken, some sort of change in strategy. I mean, you either go with what Bill Kristol said, which is add a bunch of troops so that when you move from place to place, you hold what was there, or you scale back, pull out, subdivide, and hope.
But it would send a good message, I think, to people. If to have Rumsfeld, he's become a figurehead. He's become the face of the war, and so whether fairly or unfairly he's been asked to step down, people associate him with what has gone wrong. And so for the president to resign and for the president to replace him with somebody else would be somewhat of a fresh start. And I think that would be the American people would respond well to that.
Yeah. Why are you looking at me, Chef?
I don't know. I thought you might have something to say there. Anybody else? What's going on in the brain's head right now? What's Karl Rove doing now? I mean,
well, I think he's blanching at some of these House seats that are probably going to go tonight, and but he's also thinking a step ahead and how to make a lemonade out of this lemon. But if you look at historically what happens after elections like this, a White House is set back on its heels for a while, and it takes a while for the results to sink in, and then accepting the results. It's it's kind of a grieving process, and then figuring a way forward. And I think at the moment, if what we're hearing about what's going on in the White House is correct, they're a little bit still in the shock mode, and they will be for a while.
I'm not going to give you officially what was read, but from our correspondents there, but I think they're somewhat stunned on some level. What does President Bush need to say tomorrow, Bill?
I was thinking about I think his press conference tomorrow, his statement tomorrow will be very important, much more than the usual sort of post-election courtesies. I'm sure he'll be pleasant and to Speaker Pelosi, and we'll see what he says about the Senate. But I mean, he really needs, in my view, he's president for the next 2 years. And American foreign policy depends on a strong president. Now, that doesn't mean he can't be bipartisan in many ways, but he has to govern. They cannot go into a sort of defensive crouch in the White House and pretend that they can just wish away the next years. The world is too dangerous. So I think he needs to be, from my point of view, there are strong things he could do, hawkish things he could do, but some of them could also be bipartisan things. But he really needs to sit down and have a serious strategy for governing on both foreign and domestic policy.
Do we as Americans need a serious talk? There is, no matter how you feel about President George W. Bush, you must know by now that he believes what he's saying. And I think there are a few on either side of the political fence who would say anything other than when he says he believes this comes down to civilization here, he means it. Does someone need to look the American public in the eye with that in mind and say, this is a call. It's time to step up and realize what the cost of a loss is in the war on terror. If you lose the war on terror, you lose the civilization as we know it. That's what he said. That's what he believes. Have we been properly motivated? Have we been told it's time to stand up and sacrifice for this nation and for this way of life? Or have they just been rhetorical overloads? Who talks and what do they say? And is the Senate gone? Stay tuned. The United States Senate rests on 3 states, Montana, Missouri, and Virginia. And Virginia, Virginia is 1,792 votes separating with more than 2 million votes cast. 1,792. There's a recount coming, then lawyers probably do. Get your flights booked. Judge Andrew Napolitano is with us now, our chief judicial analyst and former New Jersey Superior Court Justice. Hey, Judge, I guess this recount is something that's just more sort of a matter of course, and then it gets fun.
Absolutely, Shep. Virginia, like most states, has a statute which requires when the difference between the 2 candidates is less than 1/2 of 1%.
And this is 1/10.
Correct. The recount is automatic. But the recount, remember, is a mechanical, ministerial function of adding up numbers and checking them and double checking them. The lawyers really don't come into play unless someone's going to say, hey, you shouldn't have counted that ballot or you shouldn't have let that person vote. Those type of arguments are really at a minimum at this point. And in modern history, Shep, Bill Kristol knows this, recounts rarely change the outcome. In fact, they usually reinforce whoever was the winner at the time they started the recount.
All right, and then we'll talk about the legalities of all of it. But first, we have a little breaking news coming in from Major Garrett. He's been covering the House for us all night and has new information about the new majority leader. Major?
Well, Shepard, you guys were talking in New York just a few moments ago about will there be in this new Democratic House majority a potential fight right off the bat between Steny Hoyer, who stands to be the next majority leader, and John Murtha of Pennsylvania, who announced long before this election was even settled that he might consider a race against Steny Hoyer. Now, look, I've talked to a lot of Democrats who think this would be the worst thing possible for the party. Right after winning control of Congress for the first time since 1994, to have a big public dispute right in this leadership ranks. I picked up some information tonight that suggests that Jack Murtha is reconsidering challenging Steny Hoyer for that number 2 slot in the House Democratic leadership. One reason he is considering that is because he knows the party doesn't want to have a public fight. What might Murtha take instead? I have been told by Democratic sources that one thing he is looking at and considering is a possible run to be the chairman of the House Appropriations Committee. Now, why would that matter? Well, in the House, the Appropriations Committee writes every spending bill for the government, including those for the military. That would put John Murtha in the center of any debate with the White House and the Senate on funding for the Iraq War. That would be, in his mind, a way of the Democrats thanking him for putting war center in this issue and this campaign, and also a way to thank the party for not challenging Steny Hoyer, meaning solving one of their problems. In exchange, they solve one of his, make him a central player in not only the future prosecution of the war in Iraq, but also how to pay for it and how much. Shep?
All right, Major, thanks. What sort of a wrench does that throw into things, Kirsten?
Well,
that's quite a challenge.
If he runs against him?
If he challenges.
If he challenges him, it's not good, obviously. And I think that they'll do probably whatever they can to keep him from doing it. And if he is interested in the Appropriations Committee, I would suspect that they're probably going to have that conversation with him.
Is it a foregone conclusion that Nancy Pelosi is the Speaker?
Yeah.
Foregone conclusion. No one will
is.
challenge her. No one.
Look, there are some Blue Dog Dems that are coming in who have said that they don't know if they would vote for her. Maybe somebody will think about
how
running
Democrats
against her.
win these seats. How'd they do it?
I think
they centered, didn't they?
Sure, absolutely. And
She's
I think
not center.
She's not. And I think that it's a good thing for the Democratic Party that we have a lot of people coming in who are centrist Dems. That's why they were able to win. That's why they were able to win in red states.
Is this the party of? Is this the party of Ted Kennedy and Nancy Pelosi and Barbara Boxer and Dianne Feinstein, or is this the party of the newcomers?
I think
is this the party of the moderates?
It's a diverse party, and I think there are going to be a lot of moderates, but there's still Nancy Pelosi still is going to be the head of the party. I think it's very difficult to make an argument that the person who was in charge when the Democrats took over, she's going to be the first female Speaker of the House. It's going to be a tough uphill climb for anybody who tries to challenge her. But because she's going to have a lot of moderate and conservative people in her caucus, it's going to have a real impact on how the Democrats interact, I think, certainly with other Republicans and with the White House and what kind of policies they come up with.
Foregone conclusion, Bill?
Yes, I think so. I mean, she led the Democrats for the first time in 12 years to the majority. And to be fair to her, she blessed Rahm Emanuel's attempts to recruit the moderate Democrats. She ran a very disciplined campaign for the last 2 months. Republicans, Rich and I know this, kept privately sort of salivating at the prospect of Nancy Pelosi out there. She'll be easy to demonize. She wasn't easy to demonize. She said very few foolish things. She raised a lot of money for Democrats, including for moderate and conservative Democrats. There was a lot of Republican overconfidence, I think, that Nancy Pelosi wasn't up to the job, and so far you got to say she's done pretty well.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And look, for Democrats, the absolute imperative is to be responsible, to project an image of competence, highlight the popular issues, but don't go crazy here. And it's imperative that Nancy Pelosi continue on the course that she set this year of trying to keep a lid on the more old-style liberalism within that caucus and give a voice to these new moderate Democrats. And you can make a case. We'll have to see, Shep, how all these races shake out at the end of the night. But you can make a case that perhaps, someone was pointing out earlier tonight, both parties in the House will end up more conservative after this, because Republicans are probably going to lose a lot of moderates, and the Democrats are going to gain a lot of people like Heath Shuler down in North Carolina who pro-gun, pro-life, social conservatives.
And think about Webb. I mean, if Webb ends up coming forward, this isn't exactly an anti-military kind of guy who ran against the President of the United States. This isn't Missouri, for instance, and the way that race was run. I mean, the people who have come forward now are right in the middle. I mean, I take a look at Tennessee, which was in the mix until just a little while ago. Yeah. 2 candidates in 2 different parties, different color skin, running as the same guy. At any rate, we are coming up on the top of the hour, and it is 1 o'clock on the East Coast, 10 p.m. in the West. This is Fox News Channel's continuing coverage as you decide 2006. Here is the balance of power as we know it. First, in the United States House of Representatives, where the outside suggestions were that maybe the Democrats would be able to pick up as many as 30 seats. It now appears somewhere between 30 and 35. The United States House of Representatives is fully in the control of Speaker of the House-to-be Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats, where they have gone through a landslide victory tonight. Searching exit polling and phone data from Fox News and otherwise from coast to coast, those who made this change have said almost without exception they made the change because of the war in Iraq, looking for general change. If the phrase is throw the bums out, tonight they have. In the United States Senate, it is much closer and still too close to call that they have picked up a number of seats tonight. The Dems have picked up 3 seats, the most prominent of which, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Rhode Island, all lost by the Republicans. Arizona has gone, has been held up. Tennessee has remained a Republican seat. It was vacated by Bill Frist and picked up by Bob Corker, the former mayor of Chattanooga. So we're down to 3. We're down to 3 different Senate races that are going to decide it all. The first one is from the state of Montana. Montana is still very close, and we have the numbers to show you from Montana. Still in the very early hours there, because the polls haven't been cleared closed for that long. And let's face it, getting them around in your outfit around the state of Montana, especially if you're west of the Divide. I mean, if you're in Jordan, Montana, it takes a while to get them to Billings, and that's what they have to do. So we're at 38% of the vote in the state of Montana. We have 2 different thoughts about who might win this thing. Some on our decision team look at the numbers and the counties that are represented here, and they say Great Falls is going this way. At any rate, it's too early to call this. It's going to be a bellwether, though. The next one that's left now is Missouri. Missouri, this has been a dogfight from the very beginning. We've been talking about how close this was. I remember being outside St. Louis just a few days ago where they said it may be our statewide referenda that are going to decide this thing. It may be the stem cell issue. It may be the tobacco tax. We don't know what it is, but they had very high turnout in the state of Missouri with long lines and imperfect weather. Still too close to call there. And then there is the state of Virginia, where we're 1,800 votes apart with 99.36% of the votes counted. It's all done except the recount, then the lawyering. And I don't think that's I mean, you know, come on, we live here, we know what goes on. They're going to have a lot of lawyers there. And the lawyers are going to battle it out, and yoo-hoo, that'll be fun. Bill Kristol?
I think what we learned, though, from seeing these updates is Missouri, it was correct that it was St. Louis and Kansas City out. They're now coming in, and McCaskill has a lead over Talent, and it's hard to believe that that lead's not going to increase. So again, we're not calling it officially, but it's hard to believe that Missouri, I believe Missouri is now going to go Democratic. Virginia, I guess we're waiting still for very few precincts outstanding, not on the recount, but on the original count. It does look to me like Webb will go into the recount with a couple of thousand vote lead. It's rare for that to get overturned. And then Montana, Tester's ahead now by 4 points. If you had to bet right now, I think you'd bet on a Democratic Senate.
Yep, all right. If you had to bet right now, you'd bet on a Democratic Senate. Did you really think that was possible at let's say, 1 o'clock this afternoon?
I did. I predicted, actually, the Democrats would win the Senate, and I guess they may do so.
Prediction. Let's not have this braggadocio on the set about the correct predictions.
Occasionally, you know, stop clock is right twice a day. So.
Missouri, you know, Missouri, there were so many matters in play in the state of Missouri. There were so many pushes and pulls there. Our Steve Brown's been covering Missouri for a long time now. Steve, what happened? What happened with stem cells? What happened with tobacco? What happened with those things that we thought in suburbia were going to move people?
They didn't move them quite as much as people here thought, or certainly not as much as some of the conservative factions here in the state of Missouri would have liked. I don't think the stem cell issue really resonated quite the way that a lot of conservatives and perhaps the Republican Party of the state of Missouri thought it would here in this particular state. We've got about 75% of the vote tallied here, and right now Jim Talent has himself about a 40,000 vote lead over Claire McCaskill. My last check of the way the state is counting the vote, that includes absolutely none, 0 of the city of Kansas City. Wow. That is one of the 2 huge blocks of Democratic votes in this particular state. This is a very typical Missouri election night. The smaller counties where the Republicans dominate and have fewer votes to count, they're in early. So basically, it's incumbent upon all of those Republican counties to get out the vote and provide a huge margin, because they know those 2 cities, St. Louis and Kansas City, Democratic strongholds, are going to report last, and they're going to report big for the statewide Democratic candidate. That's exactly what's happening here tonight. Over the course of the last hour, we've seen Talent's lead go from 70,000 to 50,000 to 47,000 to 40,000, with about 25% of the vote left to count, and the entire city of Kansas City.
Yeah,
Shep?
and thankfully we've been able to update some of those numbers since then, and some of Kansas City has been coming in, and he's dead on. He's spot on about Kansas City and St. Louis. But you know, the thinking going into all this, and let's go back to all the thinking. The thinking was that suburbia was going to vote more, not just in Missouri, but in a lot of the Middle America. The thinking was that the wedge issues and the wedge referendum would drive the right-wing base of the Republican Party to the stem cells. Didn't do it. Gay marriage didn't do it. South Dakota, where they tried to have this, you know, this ban on all abortion, not making it. All of the wedge issues, they didn't wedge. Are the old rules gone?
Well, I think the gay marriage or the marriage being only between a man and a woman passed in Virginia ran way ahead of Allen. Maybe Allen should have done more to make the race against Webb an ideological race instead of a race of personal attacks. I think people will be critical of Allen's race for quite a long time. He thought that Jim Webb had written some bizarre, some slightly odd scenes in his novels, and that could be used to drive.
Well, this was
voters
after what
away
was
from
perceived as a racial slur.
Yeah, well, he never, George Allen never recovered from the macaca incident. And this is a real stunner. I mean, the political class had sort of absorbed the idea that what Allen would lose over the last couple of weeks or so. But if you just go back 6 months or a year ago, people were talking about George Allen as an extremely plausible presidential candidate. And I think is rattled by the macaca mistake and then never really found his footing again. And he used the word about 20 minutes ago, George Allen, when he was on our air, when we were picking up a speech, that this was an interesting election. That is the understatement of the night. This was a nightmare for George Allen, and it looks like he's not going to survive it.
Did he get the blame?
Does George Allen get the blame? Yeah, absolutely. As a high-ranking Republican official told me, thinking about this race and a couple others, you know, this would be a great business if it weren't for candidates. But you do have candidates, and they make mistakes, and campaigns always matter.
You think it's possible, Michael, I know this is really off your expertise, but you think it's possible that next time they might try to come up with some solutions? Because you know what they seem to do this time, and Bill Kristol, you said it, they seem to delay the decisions until after the election. Coming up pretty soon, we've got a guy who's going to give the president an excuse if he wants one. He's going to give the president an excuse to change the rules of engagement and change them big, right?
I think this was the last election for a while that won't be about the future. This was about the past. George Bush himself managed to escape a referendum on his own presidency in 2004. We had had 7 or 8 straight months of bad news in 2004, and thanks to Mr. Bush's political skills and perhaps some mistakes by his adversary in that election, he won with 8 straight months of bad news from Iraq, a year and a half after he had declared mission accomplished. So he escaped having that election be a verdict on his policy in Iraq. This time he didn't escape that. But again, it was a backward-looking election. Even the calls for Rumsfeld to resign were about things Rumsfeld had done in 2003, primarily, which I think were big mistakes. They were things having to do with disbanding the Ba'athist party and disbanding the Iraqi army and not preparing for the post-Saddam period properly. In other words, not so much about what to do now. Democrats knew, the political science says, if an incumbent is unpopular and doing badly, make the election a referendum on what he's been doing, what he has done. But that can't work starting tomorrow.
All right, I want to talk for just a second about the windsurfer-in-chief, John Kerry. Is the botched joke now not a big deal? I heard a radio talk show, as we drove across America, I heard a radio talk show go, he just did it. He just ruined it. The Republicans are going to sweep. I would say his name, but he's sometimes on another cable news channel. He's sometimes in my time slot. So I won't say it, but he was 100% sure that that had blown it. We'll get to that in a minute. First, Arnold Schwarzenegger. You look across the country and find a Republican who has been more successful than Arnold Schwarzenegger. Arnold Schwarzenegger is in a capital D, double D Democratic state. Yet he's gone out there and won his governorship in a landslide. How did he do it? Listen.
I can express my gratitude to my #1 and to the greatest asset that I have, which is my wife, Maria. Give her a big hand. I want to thank you, Maria, for all the great work that you've done. I mean, throughout the whole year, you've worked very hard on this campaign, and I know I would not have won without your help. So thank you very much. A big hand again to Maria for great work.
You know, how did he do it? Rich, what is it that guy has done out there? I mean, because don't tell me California doesn't have problems. It has problems.
It's a classic case, Shep. If you can't beat him, join him. And after his stunning political defeat, when he was trying to push all these referenda through that I think that were actually good ideas and would have increased the sensibility and effectiveness of California government, he got slammed by the unions and by the rest of them. So he just said, okay, I'm going to govern like a Democrat. And he's done that, and in California it's worked.
Carl Cameron, what else did he do?
Well, one of the things that he did was he fired a whole bunch of people, and he brought in a campaign staff that was essentially part of the Bush White House. A whole bunch of Bushies from the 2004 re-elect campaign trucked out there to Sacramento and L.A. about 7 months ago And they took then Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was at a whopping 35% approval rating, and they pushed him into a victory. They pretty much clobbered Angelides about a month and a half ago. He was so far down in the polls that unless Schwarzenegger really screwed up, there was no way he was going to lose. And it was a combination of things, not the least of which was recognizing the voter discontent in California and adjusting for it. And there's an awful lot of Republicans who were telling George W. Bush in the early part of this summer he could take a lesson from Schwarzenegger and change his strategy a little bit, suggest that he heard the American voters' discontent over a variety of things and it might help Republicans. It certainly helped Arnold Schwarzenegger, but it wasn't until just recently that the president began to sort of acknowledge that, yes, there would be some new strategy coming out with the Baker Commission and a variety of other things, allowing Republicans to say, wow, the president seems to get it, and sort of temper some of their stay-the-course rhetoric in order to get more in line with the American mentality.
All right, Carl, our Anita Vogel has been covering Arnold Schwarzenegger as well and has watched those same sort of changes take place. And our goal when we were out in California a week ago was to try to get an interview with Arnold Schwarzenegger and ask him these questions about what maybe Republicans can learn from him. It was clear that things weren't going perfectly. Anita Vogel's out in Los Angeles for us. Anita, what about it? Can't go to her at the moment. All right. Well, here's what we're going to do next. John McCain is up. John McCain, called by some at one point senator from media, was up for some time. And what we're going to ask John McCain in just a minute exactly what it is the president or the Republican Party needs to do now, what sort of changes the president needs to make now, whether Don Rumsfeld should step down now, and what the president will say tomorrow, 1 o'clock Eastern, 10 p.m. Pacific. Does he get it? We'll be back. It's 15 minutes past 10 o'clock in San Diego and Los Angeles and Seattle and up and down the West Coast and in Montana. Montana's going to be big this night, and it would appear at least that the nod for now, at least, is going to the Democrat tester. We have about 47% of all precincts reporting and votes counted. Slight lead there. I think conventional wisdom around here is if you had to guess, which we're not doing, but if you had to, you'd probably guess that this goes Democratic. We'll have to wait till all the votes are counted. Next, Missouri. Now, Missouri, there seems to be some separation here. 81% of the votes are counted. It looks mighty darn close, less than, what, 10% separating there, even less than that. 49% for McCaskill, 48% for the Republican talent. We knew this was going to be close all along. It's been close since they started adding these things up. But, Bill Kristol, we may be close to a decision here?
Yeah, it does look like the outstanding vote was St. Louis and Kansas City. McCaskill's getting the bulk of it. Looks like she's been steadily gaining and is now ahead. It continues to gain. I think she will win Missouri. I think Tester will probably win Montana, though that's less than half the vote in, and I think we have less of a feel for exactly what's outstanding there. In Virginia, I've just heard there are real questions. We're not yet at a recount. They have not finished the count in Virginia. There's something between 0.75%, maybe more of the vote still outstanding. Some military ballots, a couple of counties where absentee ballots haven't been counted yet. It's probably not enough to change things, but you know, it could be 1 or 2% that hasn't been counted, and then it could get very, very close. So I think Virginia, we really won't know until tomorrow.
We are not yet calling Missouri. We expect that we may be able to make a call one way or the other shortly. Which way? We'll have to see. The decision desk is working on it right now. Wow, 1:15 in the morning on the East Coast, and your hopes are in Virginia. Would that have been a place where you might have felt pretty comfortable, though?
Of course. I mean, the conventional wisdom for the longest time was that Allen would win that race, and Webb would be an under-financed candidate, certainly an interesting candidate, an unusual sort of Democrat, but that Allen would be able to handle him. And Shep, out in Missouri, one reason to be not particularly optimistic if you're rooting for Republicans is that's really a swing state, a battleground state, a bellwether state. A lot of people said look to Missouri to see what the national mood is, because it's a race where you don't have any Abramoff money, you don't have any scandals, you have a very solid Republican senator in the person
of Jim. A lot of outside money on the tobacco tax.
In the person of Jim Talent. And what we've seen in the rest of the races tonight is there's some sort of Democratic tide. So that would probably tell you that this bellwether state of Missouri is probably going to end up tipping the Democratic way.
And here's another thing about Missouri. We were in the town of O'Fallon, Missouri, which is one of the St. Louis suburbs, Kirsten, and talking about the question being, would the people of the suburbs, middle class, upper middle class, who traditionally vote Republican, would they get out and vote, or would they be disillusioned and stay home? It seems like maybe they got out and voted, but the cities, St. Louis and Kansas City, got out and voted, and that outweighed. I mean, that's what it seems like.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to know exactly what
In
went
other
on
words,
there.
you got out the vote.
We did get out the vote, and it would be interesting to hear from the Republicans about what we've been hearing about their incredible get out the vote operation, and they were spending a lot of money, and what happened there, and was it overstated, or was it something that was, you know, something that just stemmed a worse tide?
What I would think, you know, Republicans all day long were talking about their get out the vote numbers and hitting their margins, exceeding their margins. I wouldn't be surprised if what happened was kind of a version of 2004 in reverse, where the Kerry people could say, look, in Ohio, our get out the vote effort has exceeded anything we possibly could imagine. We're going to be okay. We're going to win, not realizing that actually the Republicans were even outperforming what they were outperforming. And it may be that the Republican turnout was fine, but they got swamped by the Democratic turnout and the independents tilting against
We can dissect this all night,
yeah.
but tomorrow they're going to have to start talking about what the people have said was the root of the problem, and that, according to the people, was Iraq. And I'll talk to you about that, Michael O'Hanlon, in just a moment. But first, John McCain is with us. John McCain, a potential candidate in 08, but right now a Republican who's looking at the numbers and wondering what went wrong. Senator, good of you to be here. What did go wrong?
Well, I think that we probably went to Washington to change government, and many of our people believe that government changed us, that we didn't address their priorities, particularly in the area of excessive spending, earmarking, failure to reform immigration, other issues, Social Security and others, and I think that it frustrated our base as well as others. And by the way, I'm confident that we've faced these defeats in the past, and I'm confident we'll bounce back. We'll return to our conservative philosophy, which I think most of America shares. And by the way, I saw good friends of mine go down tonight, and I regret that. Mike DeWine, Rick Santorum, and others. They're good and decent people.
You said earlier on Fox News Channel that the perception was that the Republicans were drunk with power and out of touch in Washington. How do you fix that?
I wouldn't say drunk with power, nor completely out of touch. I just think that we kind of lost our way in that we weren't careful stewards of their tax dollars. We allowed this earmarking and pork barrel spending to get out of control. We didn't reform immigration, which we could have done in a number of other areas. And so we paid a penalty for it. But again, 1976, we lost just about everything, and it was a guy named Ronald Reagan that redefined our party and reminded us of where our moorings were, and I'm confident we can do that. We'll all sit down and we'll work very hard to regain their confidence, and I'm absolutely convinced we'll do it.
The people have said that in large part, coast to coast, state to state, district to district, this is about the war. What sort of changes are possible in the immediate hours and days ahead? Does Donald Rumsfeld need to step down?
Well, I've said for a long time that I had no confidence in Secretary Rumsfeld, but that's a decision to be made by the President. I'd just like to remind you that Joe Lieberman was reelected in Connecticut, a liberal state who supports the war. I think the war was a major issue, but I think there's other issues, the ones that I just talked about before, particularly fiscal responsibility. But on the subject of the war, we have to have the will to win. I believe we can win. I believe we can prevail. I think we can bring order out of chaos, and I think we need to do whatever is necessary. And if the Democrats would join us, I think we could work out a strategy that would succeed. But I believe if we allow chaos to prevail there, that chaos will spread, and we'll be paying a very heavy penalty.
The President and the Vice President and Karl Rove all seem to try to be as upbeat as possible about ways to go forward with the war. Is it fair to say that you were downbeat on such a thing, that you were maybe being as honest as you knew how to be with pointing out some of the problems that were being had along the way? And is it possible that a voice as loud and influential as yours might have hurt with that tone? I'm just curious.
Oh, no, I think the American people need to be told the truth. I think they need to be told what's at stake here, which I'm not sure all of them are. There's a great deal at stake here, and I believe chaos in the region is a result of a premature withdrawal. But I think it's also, in fairness to the American people, you need to tell them when it's long and hard and tough. I've said for years that we needed more troops over there. That's been well chronicled now that that was correct. We need to do other things too, but look, the key to me right now is not to look back in anger, but it's to look forward and I believe the American people, when they know what's at stake, they will support a course of action which is necessary, and I'm confident that we can still prevent failure there in the region.
John McCain, thank you very much. I'd ask you if you're running, but I know you're not going to say so. Good of you to be here. Bill Kristol, you and John McCain, and I could go through a long list of people who have been saying the exact same thing which no one wants to listen to, and that is, we've heard from hundreds of people on the ground. They leave an area, it gets filled up again, the insurgents follow them around. This isn't terrorists, they're insurgents, largely. 9 out of 10 of them are insurgents. They're fighting their little war of civility. They're fighting their own little thing there on the ground. Is it time to get out of the way, or is it time to beef up and win? This middle-of-the-road thing, clearly Americans don't think much of.
Well, the president's going to have to decide what to do. Obviously, some of us have been arguing for more troops for an awful long time. I think he could do it. You know, it seems contrary, and Rich made this point earlier, to say, well, the president suffered an electoral defeat partly because of Iraq, and the thing to do now is to double down, so to speak, to send more troops. I think if he gets bipartisan leadership in and explains the strategy, I think he would have to change the Secretary of Defense to have credibility for the new strategy, and says we're going to send more troops, we're also going to do some diplomatic efforts, we're going to really, you know, work together with leadership in the Congress and get some new voices in from outside perhaps as well. I think he can get a bipartisan consensus to win the war, because people, serious people on both sides of the aisle, know what the cost of defeat would be. But this will be the challenge for the president. I mean, we shouldn't kid ourselves. This is what, in my view, the next 6 months of this presidency have to be about. And it'll be very interesting to see what he says tomorrow about this.
Michael O'Hanlon's new book is Hard Power, The New Politics of National Security, and I wonder if somewhere in there isn't some sort of plan that maybe Baker could hand-deliver him.
Well, I hope there are a couple of ideas. I think Bill is onto something, but I also think there are a couple of problems with hinging everything on the troop issue. For one thing, we don't have the troops. Now, Bill's been very prescient and been saying all along we need more. We need a bigger Army and bigger Marine Corps so we can draw on a larger pool of people to sustain the troops in Iraq. We haven't done that. To me, that's perhaps one of the biggest mistakes Secretary Rumsfeld's made since 2003, 2004. I'm not sure we can really increase. And if we do, it's got to be on a temporary basis. There's got to be some reason to think you can turn the corner within 12 to 24 months, because otherwise I don't think our Army and Marine Corps can sustain it. What that means is you need other elements to the strategy as well, putting pressure on the Iraqi leadership. I was at a conference recently where some Army generals said to me, I'm not sure the Iraqi leadership has the same goals anymore that we do. Translation, the Shia are gearing up to win a civil war if one happens, and we all know one is beginning.
And they're arming themselves with, in many cases, our arms.
Yes, that's exactly right, and they are also not clamping down on the militias any more than they feel they need to please us. So we are in a crossroads. If you don't get the Shia leadership, Prime Minister al-Maliki, and also other Iraqi leaders, to agree on revenue sharing so the Sunni Arabs get their fair share, on rehabilitating former Baathists so they can get their jobs back, get their lives back, as long as they don't have blood on their hands, if they're not top Saddam cronies. If you don't make other steps like that, there is a civil war already beginning in Iraq that's going to get worse. And while I think the troop issue could help, by itself it's not enough. So I think it's got to be part of a broader strategy, and hopefully that gives room for Democrats to actually have a few ideas in this as well.
That's exactly where you'd see this going if you're just thinking it out, you know, right now, sort of on the spot. A more aggressive, hawkish policy in the sense that you finally go in with more troops, which Democrats used to be in favor of. You know, the Democratic talking point was, General Shinseki was right when he said you need a couple 100,000 troops to secure this country. Democrats don't talk that way so much anymore.
Well, let's face it, there was no appetite for that before the election. It was Bill Kristol who said the changes have to happen. They have to happen, or nothing can happen but a loss here.
But
he wouldn't change it until after the election. Well, it's after the election now. Let's make some changes, I think is what America said.
I very strongly believe, Shep, that it's somewhat counterintuitive. If prior to the election, sometime earlier this year, he had said, you know what, Iraq is in a crisis. And he said that at times,
Not
but
like
really
that.
punched through and said, I realize it's in a crisis, and this is my new policy to deal with it, and it includes more troops. That would have helped him politically, because what hurt so much is the sense that he was detached from reality and didn't have any way to deal with it. And the point I was going to make following on from Michael is you do the more hawkish element with more troops, then you reach out to responsible Democrats like Joe Biden and others saying, okay, you want a regional conference? Maybe we do a regional conference. You have ideas for how to promote Iraqi reconciliation? Well, let's talk about those ideas and see if we can implement them.
But Juan Williams, do we first need to be looked into the eyes like children, maybe? Maybe like happened in the late 20s, before they had camps down south where people were working to try to, if nothing else, to spread the message that this is a crisis. If what the president says he believes, and there's no reason to believe he doesn't someone first need to look us in the eye and tell us how gravely serious this is?
There's no doubt about it. I mean, arguably, if you looked back over the course of the Bush presidency, you'd say that after 9/11, he had a chance to call on the American people to make a sacrifice. And part of that was to say to us all, we're in a war. We're in a war with terrorists who want to kill us. And we need to make sacrifices, and I think part of that would have been to say, we're not going to have these tax cuts for the moment, or we're going to only have some of the tax cuts. Secondly, he might have talked about, you know what, we need more young people to join our military, to make a commitment, and if I don't get them, we might have to have a draft in this country. Again, it might have been unpopular, but you got to remember, thinking back, Shep, he had a 90% approval rating. It was a moment at which the country was coming together, at which people overseas were saying we're all Americans, we're all under attack. And I think he's got to go out and make that case. He's got to articulate it in a passionate way, not simply say, I'm staying the course, because that suggests a lack of flexibility, a lack of creativity in thinking. But he's got to go out and make the case. And one possibility that exists here is that you get the Democrats to join with the president, and you have more of a solid front across political lines, across the aisle, saying, you know what, we understand the threat America faces, and here is how we're going to deal with it. We're going to stop this kind of, partisan bickering and really get serious. So now, I think, to listen to Bill Kristol, he wants to put more boots on the ground, but I don't think the American people politically would support that at the moment.
Kirsten Powers, is it possible that, all we've really been doing for the last year, I mean, now that this election is over, can we just look ourselves in the eye and be honest? The Congress hasn't accomplished anything. They laid out what they wanted to accomplish. They spelled it out, spot by spot, and none of it was done, none of it. So all they've been doing up there is talking. So here we are talking again. Is anybody going to be able to get something done?
Well, everybody's been running for office, is what's been going on.
Well,
and the reason
congratulations. So now the campaign starts for 08. Great.
Right. And so, well, the good news on that is that the Democrats now have 2 years to try to convince the American people that they're strong on national security, and because we have a presidential election coming up. So hopefully that will be a positive influence on them. And I do think that everybody is tired of this carping back and forth and name calling from both sides, frankly.
It seems like all they know how to do anymore.
And I think that, and that people do need to understand that what a serious threat that we face, and there are some Democrats, frankly, that don't acknowledge that, and hopefully we will have more people who are coming in who do, and who will come out and stop talking about the past, stop talking about what Iraq was like the day we went in, and talk about what Iraq is like the day today, and deal with the actual threat that we face, which is that it is part of the war on terror. And we have to be serious about fighting that.
The people of the United States have said today, what if nothing else, this election has made us realize two things. Top of mind, we have two big problems. One of them is illegal immigration. There has never been a civilization in the history of the world that survived without being able to control its borders. Never. Find it. Send me an email. It's not there. The other is there's a war that is not working because we're trying to call it one thing when in many cases it's another. This is 90% of this is two people fighting like they've been fighting before we even lived here. So there's that. And then there's these other people, these terrorists, who want us all dead. And they've promised, and history says they can do it if we let them. So all of that under the Nancy Pelosi umbrella. We'll talk that next. You've decided 06. We just don't know what you decided. So if you could get that to us. Montana is the place where we can start tonight. There are 3 Senate seats left, and if the Democrats get it all, the Democrats get the Senate. Here's one. Tester and Burns in the state of Montana. Now 59% of the precincts are reporting. Still waiting on some to get from the outer lying areas there and their outfits to bring them in, but we still have a separation there. If you had to say which way this is leaning, it looks like it's leaning toward Tester, doesn't it? Then there's the state of Missouri. Almost everything's in from Missouri, 84%. Largely, we believe a lot of the numbers haven't come in from in and around St. Louis, so it's kind of a St. Louis County kind of thing. The question is it within the city of St. Louis, which largely trends Democrat, which would mean McCaskill, or is it outside the city, but still in St. Louis County, which largely would trend Republican, which would mean Talent? And the truth is, we don't know. So we're having to wait. We can't call this yet, neither can anyone else. But Missouri, if you had to guess, you see the numbers, that's how you'd guess. Then there's Virginia. Get used to that word. Virginia is for lawyers, remember. That is what we're focusing on and will be now until the cows come home. Waiting now to find out if there are a few more votes to count. There will be a recount, and then there will be lawyers. And all of this will be happening at some point under the stewardship of the House Speaker, one Nancy Pelosi. What can we expect there? Is she one who could find a leader? Could she be the healer who would step forward and work across party lines? Or will she be on a search committee for such a thing? Our Carl Cameron is the chief political correspondent. Carl, what do you make of it?
Oh, it's going to be fascinating. First thing I should tell you on a couple of those boards you just did, Shep. Flathead County in Montana, they had a computer failure. They're going to have to count the ballots by hand. That's going to take them all night. There's already recount wheels turning all over Old Dominion for Virginia, and you're right, we're going to be living in courthouses. So as for Nancy Pelosi, well, she's from San Francisco, one of the most liberal communities in America. She has had to sort of shelf a lot of her own liberalism as the Democratic leader because you got to herd cats, and even among the Democratic caucus, there are some conservatives. There is division among Democrats, and a lot of the new members who are coming in are going to be pretty conservative. There is an irony in that the Republicans who got bounced tonight in an awful lot of cases were beaten by conservative Democrats who do not share the values of the House Democratic leadership soon to be in place. There are many pro-lifers, a lot of Second Amendment supporters, folks who opposed the gay marriage, and support bans on flag burning, things of this nature. Those are not the types of ideals that Nancy Pelosi in San Francisco hold. And when you take a look at what the template, what the landscape of Democratic leadership will be in terms of committee chairman, it is going to be a dramatic change from what it is right now. What they can get done? Well, they could pass everything, but it's still got to get through the Senate, where we don't know what the majority will be. And even if a Democratic Senate were to pass the most liberal of legislation out of the House, chances are George W. Bush isn't going to sign it down at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. The question is whether or not Democrats will really be able to parlay a seat at the table here. Can they broker deals and get things like a minimum wage hike attached to some of the spending and budgetary initiatives that are going to be put forth in the next year? Can they get their agenda shoehorned into those things that Republicans want to pass? That's an open question. So Nancy Pelosi has a reputation for some verbal misstatements over the years. She has enemies in the Democratic conference, including there have been famous stories about how even some of her own lieutenants in the Democratic leadership pretty much wait for her to leave the room and knife her in the back. So there will be battles. And as Major was reporting, and he's really our expert on the House campaign in the last couple of weeks, there's going to be a battle for the majority leadership between Jack Murtha of Pennsylvania and Steny Hoyer of Maryland. And Jack Murtha was, of course, one of the most famous anti-war Democrats in the country. He, of long military background and a very, very staunch defender of the Defense Department, now a vociferous Bush opponent and critic of the war, going up against Steny Hoyer, who has been a sometimes loyal, sometimes questionably loyal lieutenant for Nancy Pelosi. There's going to be fabulous intrigue when it comes to the battles among Democrats and how the Democratic Party comes to grips with the idea that it's going to be led by a woman from San Francisco. And just think about it. Every time San Francisco has a gay pride parade, Nancy Pelosi's not going to want to be in her hometown and still be the Speaker of the House.
Sunday night, Bears or Giants? Yeah, no, I'll ask somebody else that. Kirsten, we're glossing over this like it's as if the monumental achievement of the first woman House Speaker it just didn't even happen. I mean, well, let's think what this woman has accomplished, Nancy Pelosi. I mean, you talk about a tough cookie. running with, you know, she and her husband have been running this thing together, and they have been running like a freight train. And the whole party's been saying, slow down, shut up, slow. And what'd she do? She kept charging ahead. And what'd she do? She just led him to victory.
Yeah, she's very successful. And the stuff about people knifing her in the back when she's gone, I mean, welcome to politics. Who doesn't do that to, I mean, I don't know anybody who's not knifing people in the back who works on the Capitol Hill. But I think that she has done a good job. And is she from San Francisco? Yeah, she's from San Francisco. But the reality is her ideology does not translate into what the Democratic Party does any more than the ideology of the leader in the Senate who's pro-life.
Ideology didn't change. You know what they did? They voted for the same candidates, and I can take it almost all of it through this race in Tennessee. You know, Harold Ford Jr., okay, maybe his record is left of where he was running. And maybe Bob Corker's record is right of where he was running. They were running as the same guy. The morals still seem to be the same. The values on which Americans vote still seem to be the same. What they just said was throw the bums out, and they did.
Yeah, I've never heard a candidate for public office invoke Jesus as much as Harold Ford did.
Between Harold Ford and Bob Corker, you would think that Jesus lives on the street between them.
But, Shep, can we go back to Congress and the leadership issues?
Okay.
I understand the focus on the leadership issues on the Democratic side, given that they are the majority and all. But there's also going to be some I'm getting used to it. There are also going to be some fierce leadership fights on the Republican side, because we've talked a lot about Iraq tonight. But John McCain, I think, made a point worth paying attention to, that this wasn't just about Iraq. It was also, I think, to some extent, a reform election where even Republicans were fed up with the fiscal and ethical lack of discipline on the part of their own party in Congress. And you're going to see a battle in these...
you mean the president who never vetoed a spending bill?
Well, that, but then also the earmarks in Congress, there's 7, 8, 9,
earmarks
10...
that everyone puts on every time, all of them?
But the number of them went up under Republicans, a majority in House. You can look at 7, 8, 9, 10 House seats that were lost to Republicans, 4 Republicans tonight that had scandals attached to them. So you're going to see a new generation of House Republicans really pushing a return to principle and a reformist agenda and trying to topple the current leadership in the House.
So heading right.
1994.
Yeah, it does sound. And how much of all of this today, with certain parallels, you know, set aside, but how much of all of this feels like Eisenhower in '56? I mean, I'm thankful I wasn't around then, but if you look at the numbers, I mean, there was a landslide, and Eisenhower stood up and he said, I am going to protect this nation from the tax and spend liberals, is basically what he was saying. And he also had to figure out his way around war problems.
Yeah, except now we need to be protected from the tax and spend Republicans.
Well, okay.
So.
Democrats would love for this to be like 1958, which was a 6th-year election and a Republican president, when Democrats gained a lot of Senate seats, some House seats, and laid the groundwork for a hugely Democratic 1960s. 2 presidential victories, huge majorities in Congress. I don't think anyone much thinks that's going to happen after 2008, but this is the real point. 2008, we have an open presidential election, no incumbent president running, no incumbent vice president running. Both houses will be in play. The Senate will be 50-50. The House, there'll be a question of whether all these first-term Democrats can hang on. That's when an incumbent is most vulnerable. It will be an extremely unusual presidential election to have everything up for grabs all at once.
And we're going to talk about the presidential election in just a moment. Who can play on Hillary Clinton's level? Who from the Democratic side can even begin to challenge her? Who? And from the Republicans, who steps forward? Is it a John McCain? Is it a Rudy Giuliani? Do you need somebody who the other side may fear for reasons that you just might not know what he was going to do? Maybe like Nixon at one point. At any rate, we'll get into that. We'll check in with Michael Barone. 3 big Senate races left to call. 3 big Senate races that if the Democrats get them all, they own the House. If they miss even one of them, it's Republican control. And we may be very, very close to a call in Missouri. We'll be back in 2 minutes. Another gain there for the Democratic side as we continue to watch House races and make calls as we can, and we're hoping to call more of the, well, at least one of the 3 Senate races which remain. Missouri and Montana are high on the list of things we're watching in the You Decide room. Our Michael Barone is there now, keeping watch over this district as they come in. What are you seeing, Michael?
Well, let's start with Missouri, Shep. As you mentioned, Claire McCaskill, a Democrat, is in the lead, and it would seem that basic factors of what hasn't been counted yet will help her. There's only one fair-sized county that's Republican-leaning that hasn't any results, Jasper County. That's Joplin in southwest Missouri. But there's Democratic areas that remain to be counted. 38% of Boone County, which is Columbia, university town. All of Clay County, which is the northwestern suburbs of Kansas City, that leans mildly Democratic. Jefferson County just south, half of Jefferson County just south of St. Louis, that's a sort of Democratic working class area. But the key is the St. Louis area, and I think that's the reason it's hard to call. St. Louis City, the old city, which is separate from the county, 92% of the votes have been counted there. Those are pretty much in. But in St. Louis County, Shep, only 55% of the precincts have been reported. And St. Louis County is big and it is diverse. 20% of the population of the state is in St. Louis County. That means that 10% of the vote of the state is uncounted there, essentially. And St. Louis County ranges from the black majority precincts directly north of St. Louis, which are large and substantial, which tend to vote 90% Democratic, to when you get west of the beltway around St. Louis, out on I-70, places like Chesterfield. Those places vote 70 to 75% Republican. We don't know what's not reported yet in St. Louis County. What's reported is going from McCaskill about 53, 54%. The rest of the county may be similar, but we don't know if there's large numbers of those black precincts out there, which would be a heavy Democratic vote when that comes in, or if there's those 70% Republican precincts that haven't been reported yet. That might tip the county away from McCaskill and could conceivably be of aid to Jim Talent. So
What do you
without
think?
that,
Who won?
if I had to bet, I would bet that McCaskill won, but I don't think
So the Democrat.
The Democrat. But
So
I don't
that'd
think
be
you
one
could say-
down, two to go for Dems.
Yep, and then we look at Montana, and here's the situation. We've got a lot of counties not going. Conrad Burns held this seat 6 years ago by a 51 to 47% margin. It was just a narrow victory. He had promised not to run for a third term. He was running for a third term, and he nearly didn't get it. Right now, I would have to say that the probability, in my judgment, is that he's not going to get a fourth term. When I look at counties, the small rural counties, the sort of areas that he tends to carry, that have got 100% reporting, and I look at places like Golden Valley County, Granite County, Park County, Petroleum County, Pondera County, Sheridan County, I see a consistent pattern. He's running 2, 4, 6 points behind his 2000 run. That was barely, and he needs to run even with that or better.
Sounds like
to win.
you're saying Vermont may be leaning toward the Dems, too.
Vermont. No, not Vermont.
I'm sorry.
Montana.
Montana. Those are backwards.
Well, if you look at the
M
big
upside
counties
down.
in Montana, Missoula County is 100% in.
You
That's
hear
a
the
university
orchestra, right?
county, 64% for Tester. That's 5 points better than the Democrat. Yellowstone County, the biggest county, 43% in. Tester's carrying it. Burns carried it 4 years ago. That's bad news for Burns.
Wow. Okay, well, there we go. Bad news for... I'm not sure what just happened. We'll be right back. As you decide 06, we're still waiting to find out who wins control of the United States Senate. It sounds like, sorted through it all, it sounds like Montana, don't you know, may be going Democrat. We can't call it yet. It sounds like Missouri may be leaning Democrat. We can't call it yet. That leaves us in the state of Virginia. And the lawyers, too. Judge Andrew Napolitano is our chief judicial analyst and former justice on the New Jersey Superior Court. Legally speaking, where does this go?
Well, legally
I guess
speaking,
they can do anything, huh?
Yeah, no, legally speaking, nothing. You'll start a recount, which is literally adding up numbers again and examining absentee ballots and making sure they were counted. And if there's a consensus that Webb still has the lead, perhaps by more than he has now, that'll be the end of it. But if there's an argument that some ballots shouldn't have been counted, or some ballots weren't counted, or some ballots were counted twice, then you'll have lawyers making arguments before judges in the counties in which that happened. And then, like Florida, in 2000, you could have a half dozen pieces of litigation going on at once, but only if the numbers about which they're arguing are enough to change the outcome. Because if the numbers about which they're arguing are not enough to change the outcome, the court is not going to hear it. They're going to declare whoever's ahead at that point to be the winner, Shep.
Well, we're going to get something before that from the state of Missouri. I hear that our decision desk may be close. Claire McCaskill, who the numbers are leaning toward, is speaking right now. Those are the numbers as we have them. Barely a separation between Jim Talent and Claire McCaskill, and she's speaking live right now in Missouri. Let's listen.
Missourians have rejected the politics of personal character attacks.
One strategy, of course, is to stand up there and declare victory. It was talked about in Bush-Gore at one point, just walk down there and declare victory and then deal with whatever happens tomorrow. But that's not what happened tonight. So Claire McCaskill, we'll hear more from Missouri coming up in just a little while. We also understand that polls are not going to close for 4 more hours in one part of Montana because of some problems with voting machines, so they get to go late. We're not going to know in the morning. Fox and Friends may be the one. I have about a minute and a half. Rich Lowry, do you have a thought here, or is it just bedtime?
It's a big Democratic night, but at the end of the day, President Bush is still president of the United States. He still holds the whip hand on Iraq policy because he controls the executive, but he's going to have to adjust and absorb the results of tonight.
Kirsten Powers?
Yeah, I think I'm just going to be interested to see what happens with this new sort of coalition of Democrats. We've gotten so many new conservative blue dog Dems in the caucus now, and it's going to be interesting to watch how the Democratic Party sort of adjusts to this and recognizes the power that those types of voters really have in the election.
Hard power, the new politics of national security. Michael O'Hanlon, your thoughts?
Ironically, this should be the year we give Iraq one last chance, and when Democrats and Republicans have the same incentive to give one last try, at a time when the country has concluded we are starting to lose, but for most people, we haven't yet lost. It would be premature to conclude that we have. Therefore, Speaker Pelosi is not going to cut off funding. She's not going to make a move, and that issue is going to await the presidential race in a year.
Bill Kristol, does the president believe we've started to lose?
I think he does, and I think he can now acknowledge it, and I think he can do just what Mike said, and I'm hopeful we can really pull together and win in Iraq. My last thought is the following. 6 years ago, 537 votes decided the presidency with 100 million cast. It looks like this year 2,000 votes will decide the control of the United States Senate with about 80 million votes cast. Sort of an amazing thing. 80 million votes cast, 2,000 votes in Virginia will decide which party's in the majority in the U.S. Senate.
Incredible. Thank you. Thanks to all of you. And now you know the news, as we know it. 3 more to go, and our coverage is just getting started. Bridget Quinn is next on the most powerful name in news. Stay with us.
Hello, everyone. You are watching the Fox News Channel's continuing coverage of elections 2006. There is a lot to cover tonight as the races continue to be called. I'm Greg Jarrett.
Hi, Greg. I'm Bridget Quinn, and we will be with you over the next 3 hours, and we will continue to bring you late-breaking results. We have our experts here as well that will analyze what some of the key issues were to voters this season. But first, let's head on over to Molly Henneberg, who is live in D.C. covering the Senate. Hi, Molly.
Hi, Bridget. Hi, Greg. All eyes on Virginia, Missouri, and Montana. What happens in those states will determine the control of the Senate. Democrats needed to pick up 6 seats to gain control, and so far they've gotten Rhode Island, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. And again, we're still watching Virginia, Missouri, and Montana. In Virginia, Democratic challenger Jim Webb leads incumbent Senator George Allen by about 2,700 votes, with about 99.7% of precincts reporting. With such a small lead and with over 2 million votes cast, this race appears to be headed for a recount. Webb says he's optimistic, and Senator Allen says he's waiting for the final results.
I know the counting will continue through the night. It'll continue tomorrow. And I want to thank you all, because I know you're going to be like a bunch of eagles and hawks watching how every one of these votes are accurately counted.
In Missouri, that race appears to be tilting toward Democrat Claire McCaskill. In fact, you just heard her on our air pretty much declaring victory there. She's leading, and she's ahead of incumbent Senator Jim Talent. This could turn out to be a pickup for the Democrats tonight. In Montana, it's going to be a long night. Democrat John Tester is ahead of incumbent Senator Conrad Burns. The Burns campaign says election computers have failed in one heavily GOP county, so ballots are being counted by hand, and we may not have the results for several more hours. So Democrats are leading in all 3 states that they still need to pick up to win control of the Senate: Virginia, Missouri, and Montana. But especially in Virginia and Montana, we won't have final results for a while. Bridget, Greg, back to you.
All right, Molly, thanks very much. We'll get back to you shortly. Let's turn right now to the House of Representatives, where the Dems come out victorious in a big way, And of course, they're now in power. Major Garrett joins us live with that breakdown. Hi, Major.
Hello, Greg and Bridget. You know, there really is no other word for it except history was made tonight in American politics. Listen, here's some context for you. Since 1954, control of the House of Representatives has changed hands precisely twice. Tonight and back in 1994 when Republicans ended 40 years of Democratic control of the House. So what happened tonight is very big, and it's going to get bigger. Right now, Democrats have won 23 net seats in the House. They could win as many as 35. There is not a single Republican candidate nationwide who defeated a Democrat defending a democratically held seat. It's that kind of wipeout for the Republicans on the House side, at least. What does that mean? It means the House is now controlled by Democrats who will have the first say on bills paid for by the U.S. government, taxes assessed by the U.S. government, and subpoenas issued by the United States Congress of the Bush administration. That's a heavy responsibility. Just a few hours ago here in Washington, jubilant House Democrats celebrated their victory, one they have been working on for the better part of 2 years. Who will be the new Speaker of the House? Nancy Pelosi, the first woman in American history to have that job. San Francisco Democrat, one who is probably a little bit more liberal than the rest of her Democratic caucus, but nevertheless recruited candidates who were centrist, put together an entire unified plan for the Democrats, led them to victory. She said Democrats have a lot of responsibility and they intend to carry it out, she said, in a bipartisan way. Here's what she said.
We are prepared to govern, and we will do so working together with the administration and the Republicans in Congress in partnership, not in partisanship.
A couple of key notes, Greg and Bridget. In 1994, when Republicans won control, that election night, Republicans sent a letter to Democratic committee staff saying, hold every document, destroy nothing. We want to investigate the way you ran the House for the past 40 years. I confirm tonight Democrats will be sending no such letter to Republicans. They want to meet with Republicans right away, try to find a way to build a coalition on domestic issues, and also going to try to work with the president on a new Iraq strategy. They know that Iraq was the dominant issue in this election. They also know they need to have an answer, at least have an approach to deal with the policy in a new way. They hope the president will change his tone on Iraq, and if he doesn't, Democrats will be more confrontational, but they know in this election, as they said, change, voters want change. Democrats didn't define it. They were content to run on change alone. They have to add that definition now. They'll begin that work bright and early tomorrow. Greg and Bridget, back to you in New York.
All right, Major, we thank you very much. Well, here we are, 2 o'clock in the morning Eastern time, and some of the results are still coming in. We do know now what's going on in Missouri, though.
That's right. In Missouri, it does appear right now that Jim Talent, the incumbent Republican senator, is conceding defeat to Claire McCaskill, who's the state auditor, a Democrat. Let's listen to Jim Talent.
You know, I've been in a lot of different positions politically, and enjoyed very much being able to work on issues and the areas where I've been able to make a difference for people, and love getting a chance to meet people. But the things that you remember in the long run when you leave one job and go to another are the friendships, the associations, the people that you've met, the truly extraordinary people in this state and in this country that are the backbone of the nation. And God has blessed me very, very much in that. And most of all, I would say he has blessed me in the opportunity to have served the people of the state of Missouri in the Congress and now in the Senate. This is truly the greatest nation that has ever existed on the face of the earth. And all of our efforts fell a little bit short this time, but they were worth the making, weren't they? And I want all of you to go on and look for opportunities, as I will, for service to the community and the country. Thank you all. God bless you.
And so in the state of Missouri, the incumbent Republican Senator Jim Talent, this has been a firewall state for the Republicans. They needed to hold it. He is now conceding, the tone and tenor of his remarks, conceding to Claire McCaskill, who is the state auditor there, who had run these very controversial ads, Bridget, employing actor Michael J. Fox to talk about Amendment number 2 in Missouri, which would broaden the use of embryonic stem cell research.
Right, and we have just, in fact, called the race in Missouri for McCaskill. And yeah, Greg, I think that's what people are going to be talking about over the next couple of days, how much stem cell research and Tallent's opposition to that referendum might have played in this race. So once again, the results in, and Claire McCaskill, the winner over Jim Tallent. Also, that Michael J. Fox ad being lampooned, if you will, by Rush Limbaugh. That one of the bigger controversies of the whole campaign season, probably.
And one wonders whether that may have backfired against Republicans at large, in particular in Missouri against Jim Tallent. It likely drove a great many more voters to the polls in the state of Missouri than otherwise might have been voting there. There were also several important gubernatorial races across the country tonight. Let's take a quick look at some of those. State of Ohio, Democrat Ted Strickland has defeated Republican Secretary of State Ken Blackwell, the shadow of Republican Governor Bob Taft, looming very large in this race because of ethics problems that plagued him and the Ohio Republican Party.
In Wisconsin, Democrat Jim Doyle has won re-election against Republican challenger Congressman Mark Green. And that is a hold for the Democrats in a race that Republicans had hoped for a pickup.
That's right. And right here in New York, Democrat Attorney General Eliot Spitzer has beaten Republican John Faso, and this wasn't even close, replacing, of course, three-term Republican Governor George Pataki.
In Maryland, the Democratic mayor of Baltimore, Martin O'Malley, has unseated sitting Republican Governor Bob Ehrlich. Ehrlich had said publicly that his race was linked very closely to the Senate race of Republican Michael Steele and that they would both share the same fate. Well, he was right about that. Both Republicans going down to defeat tonight.
And in California, Republican Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger has won re-election over his Democratic challenger, Phil Angelides. This is quite a comeback because it was just last year, Bridget, that Arnold Schwarzenegger had a handful of ballot initiatives that he had carved up himself. He put it to voters, and they were soundly and roundly defeated. His approval ratings at an all-time low in the state of California, and boy, he really came back in a big way against Phil Angelides, who many had said, he was the state treasurer, was charismatically challenged in this race. And I suppose anybody would, standing next to Arnold Schwarzenegger.
That's a nice way of putting it for someone. Yeah, I also heard one of our commentators say Arnold's philosophy seemed to be, Governor Schwarzenegger's philosophy seemed to be, if you can't beat him, join him, and that helped him win. I want to go to Steve Brown, and we told you that the Missouri race was called just a matter of moments ago. Steve?
Yes, Bridget, pretty well played out, typical kind of strategy here. I'm sorry, interrupted there. There's a pretty well-known strategy here for statewide races in the state of Missouri. It basically comes down to this. There's 114 counties here. A lot of the smaller ones, the more rural ones with fewer votes, lean Republican. Those start getting counted very much earlier in the evening, so it looks like the statewide Republican has a lead. But then you have to factor in this, that you got to factor in this, that you've got two huge cities, St. Louis and Kansas City, which are huge blocks of Democratic votes that come in. So what the Republicans have to do is ramp up the vote total in many counties and run up as many wins as they can, as big as they can, before those other votes come in. Unfortunately for the Tallent campaign, they were short of those targets. The cast was able to cut into some of his leads, not win some of these rural counties necessarily, but just whittle down the lead enough so that when the big blocks of votes got counted in St. Louis and in Kansas City, that she could take the lead and ultimately claim victory here. Back to you in New York.
All right, Steve Brown, we thank you very much for the update.
And don't go anywhere. We have a lot to cover tonight. In fact, in just a moment, we're going to head to Schwarzenegger headquarters, check in there as the governor wins re-election. We're going to continue to look at some of the biggest races and where the major aspects were that determine each and every race. We're also going to see just how much the war in Iraq and national security played in these midterm elections.
Much more to come. Not over yet. Keep it right here. You're watching Fox News Channel. Early Wednesday morning, and welcome back to our continuing coverage of Elections 06. I want to take you right now to the California's governor race. Anita Vogel is standing by there. Hi, Anita.
Well, good evening, Bridget, and what a difference a year makes. It was almost exactly a year ago to this day in this very room that we stood and watched Arnold Schwarzenegger's special election initiatives go down in flames one by one. A lot of people wrote him off that night. They said he was finished, they said he was toast, and that he would never be reelected in this state. Well, it is a year later and a very different story for Arnold Schwarzenegger. He has coasted to victory tonight with a very comfortable double-digit lead. So the big question is, how did he do it? Well, first off, he did something that you rarely see politicians do these days. He got up before the cameras the next day and he apologized to voters for what he basically called a very expensive mistake. He also fired a number of people from his communications staff. He hired a Democratic chief of staff. He promised to work with a democratically controlled legislature, and he backed a number of issues that he resisted for a long time. Things like a hike in the minimum wage, cutting prescription drug costs, and cutting greenhouse gas emissions. As he did those things, he began to see his approval ratings rise. Now here's a clip of what he had to say here earlier tonight.
I love doing sequels. I love doing sequels, I tell you. But this, without any doubt, is my favorite sequel. I have to tell you that. What a great night and what a great victory. What a great victory for the people of California. Let me just start saying thank you to the people of California, because tonight they've once again put their faith and confidence in me. And I promise you, in the next 4 years, I will protect your values and I will protect your dreams.
Schwarzenegger's opponent, State Treasurer Phil Angelides, could just never gain any traction against Arnold Schwarzenegger. He trailed him ever since the primary. He basically agreed with so many of the issues on the table that he never could really attack Arnold Schwarzenegger with anything. All of his attacks fell flat. So again, Arnold Schwarzenegger coasting to victory tonight. As the chairman of the California Republican Party said here, the blue tidal wave that had been sweeping across the nation earlier tonight stopped at the Sierra Nevada as well. At least it did for the California governor's race. And we are watching some other very interesting races here on the West Coast, including California's 11th congressional district, where the longtime congressman there, Republican Congressman